Welcome back to the Geometric View, episode 57, season 5. Today we interview Robert Ashcroft and his theories on the universe and how it pertains as well to the Dougherty Set. I'm Buddy James, your host. Let's get into it. Let's get into the circuit. We greatly appreciate your support. The best way to donate to us is on PayPal. Just send money directly to goldenscaling@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Okay, we just started recording, and I'm on the phone here.
I'll step right back to the beginning of where we were, so people, if you are listening to this, will hear it from the beginning. Right. When I first started doing my speculation and investigations, I read two sources of material. One was Common Sense Science, which have a whole series of papers about describing the universe starting from an electromagnetic structure and producing matter behavior, like gravity and mass and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Then there was a textbook, and I'd love to get the e-copy of it again. I seem to have lost it, but it started with a matter structure. Mass and particles, and at the end of it, it produced the electromagnetic universe. The electromagnetism, all of it.
Yeah.
And
is entangled and built together.
Yeah. So I've got one structure that starts with electromagnetics and produces the matter universe view, and one that starts with the matter universe view and produces the electromagnetics view. Now I've spent years, decades, a career in information system analysis and designs, building business models that document processes and behaviors and all the rest of it. And one of the rules that comes out of that methodology is that if I can produce two valid models that'll stand up on their own, and I can go from one to the other and from the other to the first, what I have is a structure underneath that supports both those views validly. So you end up with a different understanding of what electrodynamics is and what gravity dynamics is and mass dynamics. These things are sitting on top of a foundation. So what I went to do was go and search for the foundation. So as a consequence, I questioned everything, and I just said, rightio, I'll forget about all the stuff that's out there, all the papers, the quantum, this, that, and all whatever else is out there. I'll just go back to my basic physics school books, and which dealt with this stuff without getting into the esoterics. And the two things that got me curious. Why was the electron mass different in size to the proton? If the value of the charges were the same, if the electron charge, the value of the Coulomb charge for the electron was the negative value of the value Coulomb charge for the proton, these two structures should be identical in structure. There shouldn't be a mass difference, right? Okay. So that's one thing that had me problem. So the fact that the electron is the proton is 1836 times, it's almost a prime number, heavier than the electron, then there's a problem with the theory. Our speculation and understanding's got to be wrong if we can't explain why that's happening.
Okay. You'll also tie this into when you were talking about everything being a current, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
The second thing.
Sorry, because that's why we were. Go ahead.
Yeah. The second thing that got me questioning what I'd learned in the past was the Wikipedia description of a photon, where you see the electric and magnetic fields oscillating between a maximum positive and a maximum minima, negative maximum and positive maximum, but they go through a 0 point. And according to Ampere's observation, it's a rotating or moving electric field that's producing the magnetic field. And what's happening in the photon is the electric field's going to 0, so the magnetic field goes to 0. Although the photon should stop at that point. There's nothing to continue the generation, but it goes to a maximum negative and then back through this 0 point. So whatever's explaining the way the light photon behaves and travels is wrong. right? We've observed this thing occur, but our understanding of what it is wrong. But
I totally agree.
It's a periodic arrangement. It's a frequency-driven thing. And what is not published in this material is that if you look at this photon structure properly, you will see a dominant electric and a dominant magnetic field. And then you will see a quadpole field of electric and magnetic field structure, and then a 16-fold and a 64-fold, and so on. And as these multipole arrangements occur, the intensity of those fields drops off. So what we're seeing when we look at a light...
So it's a periodic doubling. Is it a periodic doubling cascade?
Yeah, something along those lines. So it goes from 2 to 4 to 16 to 64 and so on down the track. So, but the intensity of those field structures drops away very quickly. So it becomes harder and harder to detect these things. So I'm thinking, rightio, we have these structures. How can we, people talk about the photon being a wave. And I'm saying, well, that's well and good. How do you turn a wave into a laser beam? Because what we've got a laser beam is we encouraged all these wavelets to form into a coherent beam of compact wavelets that run. And you can't do it with a wave. And you can't have a wave without a material structure. So if the photon is traveling and it's supposed to be a wave, they talk about...
You can't have a wave without a medium?
Correct.
Yeah.
You need a medium to have a wave.
Yeah.
Well,
or perturbation.
Well, something's got to be... Waves imply kinetic oscillation, right? Impacts. So you've got to have something that will move and transmit the energy to the next part of the media. So the light photon discussion that's described in traditional science or mainstream science is incomplete. It just does not explain why there's an oscillation mechanism in the photon, why we can form laser beams from it, or any of that stuff. And then you run into what is mass and what is matter, right? You can't have momentum, which is what the photon is supposed to have in terms of energy, if there's no mass, right? Momentum is a product of mass times velocity. And if you have no mass, you can't have any momentum. So, it's illogical all over the place. So from there, I'm saying, rightio, all this stuff that I've learned in my years of university and school can't be right. There's got to be a different way of looking at it. And having read these two source materials where I start with electrodynamics and end up with matter theory, and start with matter theory and end up in electrodynamics, there's got to be an underlying structure that supports both views validly.
Right. And people would call that, and some people would call that the ether or plasma.
I'm calling it the Aether. The Aether is not plasma. The Aether is the best closest thing to it is an infinitesimally small particle structure that is a boson sign condensate, so dynamic that if you were to look at it, it will look like a mill pond seed. No matter where you looked, it would look the same. It's that chaotic. And you can be on a mill pond sea where the oscillations in the water are so intense that the water is just as flat as a tack. And I've been on boats traveling across this sort of stuff. And this is what people don't understand. We don't understand necessarily the correct way to understand waves and particles and all the rest of it. But anyway, so I ended up coming up with a new model for the photon, and I'm calling it a construction because it carries energy and has mass and momentum and all the rest of it. It interacts with other matter, so it's got to be a matter-based product that's producing electrical charge and magnetic charge structures. So it's a construct. It is not a wave. It's an actual construct that's moving. And when we're dealing with waves and water and plasmas and all the rest of it, we need to understand something very important. You can have wave impulsions across the structure, across the plasma or the gas or the liquid or anything that behaves like a fluid, where the particles just move in a little area around or volume that they're constrained to. In other words, they oscillate around a general location. And kinetic energy travels through impact through that structure, and we get what we call waves. But the second thing we fail to remember is that inside the ocean, and inside the atmosphere of the planets, the gases, inside plasma structures, we have streams, flows of material, and they're called ocean currents and air currents and plasma currents. And what happens is the material of the medium forms a self-confining flow structure that allows the material of the medium to move from a given location longitudinally to some other location. And that is not a wave. And that motion will always be a helical path, never anything else. And because it's a helical path, it will knot. Right? Helical travel produces knots, which is why we get plasma birkeland current structures where they knot. They form a dense, condensed plasmoid, which is very intense, very small, and eventually it gets to the point where the constructional maintainability of that thing fails and the knot melts. And when the knot melts, we get a flow that goes from a highly constricted knot to a laminar flow, and everything that's not required gets chucked out. We get the CME mass ejection. It just explodes outwards. And it's just getting rid of the crap it doesn't need to maintain its flow structure. And it's become smooth again. And this is what's happening when we have a plasma instability and a Z pinch and things like that. Now, sometimes these constrictions can cause a massive condensation and a construction occurs, like a planet or a star gets produced, or there's a huge expression of material, and we call that a nova style event or a CME or whatever. And it filaments,
yeah. And the filaments themselves are knots that turn into systems and galaxies and planets.
Yeah. And the energy.
And hang on 1 second. Just slow down, take a breath. You're fucking kicking ass, dude. This is excuse my language, but dude, you're rocking it. And I want to emphasize that it's also these filaments. The filaments themselves are composed of what you're speaking of.
Yes.
And it's kink instability is what happens. That's the knotting, the kink instability. So that's the scientific term for it. So keep going, please.
But I'll describe this. So what we've got now, this is where you get your two hands, your right hand and your left hand. You put out 3 fingers and your thumb. So 2 fingers and your thumb, and you join them together. Now, your 2 fingers, the 2 hands are negatively charged, but they're rotating in the opposite direction. Now, just watch what happens to your fingers as you rotate your hand in the opposite direction. Your fingers go from touching to halfway to touching to halfway and so on. But there's 3 fingers involved. So what you get is this 1/3 oscillation from -1/3 to +1/3 as you rotate your hands. Now, one of the things that is not actually described well in electrodynamics or magnetics or electrics is the fact that if I have 2 negative charges and I'm rotating them in the opposite directions, they'll actually attract to each other. They won't repel because the 2 electric fields are in opposite directions, so they cancel out. And because they cancel out, if one electron looking at the other one says, oh, you're positive, and the other electron looking at the other one says, no, you're positive. They're both negative, but because their fields are going in the opposite direction, they cancel out and they look like opposite charged. And Weber, in his documentations of the 1850s or 1846 or whatever, described this exact behavior when he was coming up with his planetary model for the atom. Right, so the issue here is as charge is cancelled. So if I can cancel my electric and magnetic field structures to make them, diminish, the structure will shrink. It'll become very, very small.
Yeah, but when omni-expansive, omni-contractive construction, like Buckminster Fuller often talked about, but no one really talks about it since then. But no, I'm kidding. There's a lot of people that talk about that, and that's what a lot of future shapes are based off of. So
in the process of doing this, so this is just electric charge. Positive charge behaves in the exact same manner, except it's positive involved. And then you get the electric positive arrangements, which occur in the neutron structure, where you've got The important thing here is the electric charges, negative and positive, are rotating in the same direction. If they're opposite, they will repel, and if they're rotating in the same, they will attract. And it's all to do with the direction of the fields. But going back to Ampere, he made an observation where he got a magnetic needle and he moved it around a wire, and it deflected in opposite directions depending on which side the wire was and the direction of the current. And then he got a magnet and moved it around a wire, and he got electrical responses. And he did not know, and this is very important for people to realize, he did not know what the wire consisted of. He did not know what the magnet consisted of. He did not know what the air consisted of. It's only later afterwards that we found out that there are atoms involved, right? And it wasn't until the mid-40s, when they were playing around with their nuclear reactors and nuclear bombs, that they discovered that the electron and the proton are monopole electric structures, which also possess a dipole magnetic structure, right? Ampere did not know that. And in the absence of knowing that, he made the assumption that the moving electric charge was producing a magnetic field. But there's no way we can actually prove that that assumption is correct. To prove that his assumption is correct, we need to produce a matter structure that is only electrical with no magnetic quality whatsoever. And I don't mean indetectable magnetic, I mean none. And we need magnetic material that has no electrical properties whatsoever. And if we can get these two types of material, the electric material and the magnetic material, and move them and they interact, then we can say that a moving electric field produces a magnetic response and so on. But we can't produce those two matters. We can't perform the experiment. We can't prove the theory correct. The speculation is unfounded. And on the basis of that alone, and if you cannot prove by experiment the assumption must be wrong. That's a fundamental in science. So Ampere's assumption, I'm fundamentally questioning it. And because I'm saying you can't prove that this is occurring, Maxwell's standard equations, number 3, which says a moving electric field produces a magnetic response, cannot be proved. That mathematical statement is wrong. It needs to be changed. It needs to be changed into an electric-only response and a magnetic-only response. And when that occurs, then maybe our mathematics will start to marry up with reality, because reality states that the Maxwell's equations do not apply in all cases. They only apply in constrained cases. And that has been known and published statement for over 100 years, right? So the mathematics that Maxwell's equations sets up is fundamentally flawed. And if we want to go to the correct solution, we need to go back to Weber, who dealt with charges independent of each other. It was always talking about two charges moving in relation to each other, and you need to do a proper mathematical model for the electrics. And because that's a monopole field structure, you only need to have two sets of equations. However, with the electron and the proton, we know it's also possessing a magnetic dipole. And my claim is that the electrics has got nothing to do with the magnetics at this stage. So if we're going to describe the behavior that's interacting there magnetically, we need 4 equations, because there's 2 sets of poles, which is one of the reasons why we get this multipole arrangement when we're looking at structures. And we see this inside electrical circuits and all the rest of it. But it's important because
there's a preponderance of charge in any of that dipolarity creates the dipole. You can't have a dipole without preponderance. There has to be more charge coming in one pole versus the other pole on both the north and south and east and west poles.
Yes.
Quadrupole, like you're talking about.
There are various videos out there on YouTube that show this sort of issue. There's a guy who deals with magnetics and producing energy, free energy things and all this sort of stuff. But it's our understanding that's the problem here. It's not what we've observed. It's our, how does this thing work understanding this is a problem. We're very good at documenting, cause and effect relationships, but as a group in science, we're extremely poor at explaining why that behavior that we observe has to happen and not some other behavior. Why is it that behavior? Why do things get hot? Why do they cool down? That's the explanation we really should have in science. You know, we can describe how things cool down, but why should they? Why should they cool down? Why should they change state? That is what we've got to deal with. Anyway, so getting back to our structure, the light photon and the neutron are multipole structures. They're multipole electric structures, and they're multipole magnetic structures. And because of this, we have missed the understanding of what's really going on. So, you know, a lot of people don't realize that you can have what we would call a neutron atom. A neutron atom consists of 1 neutron, or 2 neutrons, or 4 neutrons, or 6 neutrons. And the reason why it's those numbers is you've got an electric and a positive charge with a photon dump in it.
Can you stress the point when we were talking earlier? You started talking about how everything is a current. Can you relate that point to everything you're talking about again? Because that was gorgeous and so simple, and that should be an opener to a talk. I think that would be a great opener to your talk we were talking about. So keep going.
When we're watching the environment, we're out there watching the thunderstorm and the light show and the lightning bolts going off and going, wow, isn't this fantastic? Bang, and hoping the lightning doesn't hit us. We're not the guy who's been hit 7 times and still survived. But, you know, good luck to him. You never win the lottery because he's already got easy winnings. But anyway, so when we see the lightning bolt strike, what's actually happening? We've got a 3-part process. First of all, a field structure develops instantly between the ground and between the 2 polarities of capacitance, the 2 voltage
leader.
Right, and it produces a motion of particle charges, electrons and protons and ions, and it forms a conduit path through which the discharge of electrical and magnetic energy, and it's both, travels down and smacks into whatever. Now, the lightning can come from the cloud to the ground, which is our normal experience, or it can go from the ground to the sky, which is what happened when that volcano near Tonga blew up about 3 or 4 months ago. You see the pictures, and the lightning's going up into the air and forking out, right? So I never realized that was possible, but, you know, if someone had said it, and you're thinking about electromagnetics and discharges, you would say, well, there's no reason why it shouldn't happen. And here's the evidence that proves that it does happen. And science has got to get off its, you know, high horse of saying, you know, oh, someone's claimed this, but we didn't see it, therefore it didn't happen, you know. Rubbish. It was observed. If you're not going to accept the observed evidence, then don't be a scientist. Don't come to me claiming you got your PhD and you're a scientist. If you're not going to accept the evidence, go away. I won't recognize that you are a scientist. So, and I don't care about your academic qualifications, because as far as I'm concerned, you don't deserve them. But anyway, we'll move away from it. So what is actually occurring? We're getting an electrical discharge, and because the structure that's involved in there is also magnetic, we're getting a magnetic discharge. So it's a dual discharge. One is a monopolar charge transfer, and the other is a dipole charge transfer. And the flow of particles is in 2 directions. One's from the clouds to the ground, and the other's from the ground to the clouds. And the reason why the lightning is white and not red is it's mostly electrons that are traveling. And they're easy to move, whereas the ions are slow to move. And if you saw an ion, a positive lightning bolt strike happen, it would be red or redder. It wouldn't be blue. And these 2 phenomena do occur. You know, if you look at sprites above the clouds, you see them in different colors. And, you know, part of that is due to the optics of the plasma, but you see red sprites, and you see blue sprites, and you see green sprites. They're not just all white, which is what we see with electrons being shoved around. So anyway, so here I am. I've got an observation that says, if we look at matter structure, because we know that it's got electric monopoles and magnetic dipoles in it, and we can't prove Ampere correct, then every time we see a lightning bolt, I call it an electromagnetic lightning bolt, but it's more than that. But at least it's an electrical and magnetic discharge between two polarized locations. And what it's trying to do, what the universe is trying to do in this example, is to balance out the charge differential. It's trying to make it zero charge. Because we've got a high charge, we're trying to go to a zero charge. But this is localized. We're in a big electric and magnetic universe of charge arrangements. The ionosphere is a huge Van de Graaff with lots of shells in it. My colleague tells me that's, over 40,000 shells of plasma bubble around the Earth, which is, a Van de Graaff direct of humongous scale. And if something penetrates through all those layers, it's going to cause an electrical discharge and a magnetic discharge. And when it hits the ground, it's going to be energy unbelievable. So I have this suspicion, and I would say I'd be more correct than saying speculate that, predict that. Every lightning bolt that occurs on the Earth is due to the fact that the Earth gets impacted by an electromagnetic particle. It might be a muon, it might be an ion, it might be a little piece of dust, but what happens is this particle creates a conduit path through the ionosphere, through the atmosphere, and we get an electrical discharge, an electromagnetic discharge, a magnetic discharge and an electrical discharge following that path down a charged plasma that's created. Plasma is a conductor, right? People think that because it's, a gas and all the rest of it, it's not conductor, but it is. It will form dual layers, but if I penetrate those layers, I will get a conduction channel and massive releases. Now, if we're going through 40,000 different layers of potential energy, electrical and magnetic potential, and we short circuit that by sticking a piece of wire through it, we're going to get a massive discharge. All the electrons and protons that are around ready to move follow down the wire. And Columbia gets blown up on the way back to Earth because it got hit by a lightning bolt. Oops. So anyway, we then, in my understanding, so I have this two sets of papers where I started with an electromagnetic understanding of the universe and produced matter behavior. I started with matter behavior and produced electrodynamics. That was one thing that says, well, something's not right here for me. Then I go back to the traditional understanding of the light photon, and this is where resonance and frequency and all this sort of stuff comes in, and the ocean waves, right? As I described, the ocean waves, we've got an oscillating particle that kinetically interact with its neighbors and create a wave front, right? Or we have a stream of confined particles that goes from one location to another, and that's the laser beam behavior. Now, for that two behaviors to occur, the light is interacting as a construct with a matter medium of some kind. And I believe and accept the idea that light is traveling through a luminescence media, but it's not in the sense of the 1800s where it's some sort of nefarious thing. It's actually a matter construct like the ocean, except the particles are infinitely small. And the light is a construct that's traveling as a in a conduit, a helical path through this material. And because it's an electromagnetic construct and it's traveling through an electromagnetic media, these two things interact. And thus the speed of the photon traveling through the media is confined by the environment through which it flows. And this is very important to understand. All the stuff that they go on about Einstein, one thing he did get right. He only stated that the speed of light is what is limited, that the photon itself can only travel at a given speed. Not that everything else travels at the speed of light, can't be changed, right? The speed of light limit only applies to the photon, nothing else. And people who don't believe me, go back and read his original German papers and prove to me that he said something different. Don't listen to the Chinese whisperer guys out there that says, oh, Einstein claimed, because he never did. And I've had this checked. And a research group was so hot to trot on it, they actually went back and went through everything he ever wrote. And he said, I got the feedback I got, which is hearsay, was, yeah, you're correct. He never, ever stated that the speed of light was a limit for matter speed other than for the photon. So I've come to the conclusion that the photon is a construct. And because it's an oscillating construct, it's able to go through a positive energy maxima in terms of electric and magnetic field structures, and to a 0 point, and then to a minimum negative maximum.
Okay.
And it oscillates between these two things. But if we were applying Ampere's assumption, we need an electric field to exist to have a magnetic field. But with the traditional explanation of the light photon, the electric field goes to 0, the magnetic field goes to 0. There shouldn't be anything else happening afterwards because we don't have an electric field anymore. It's gone. So one of the questions I'm saying is, where is the electric energy being stored and the magnetic energy being stored to allow it to go from a positive maximum to a negative maximum through a 0 point? How do you achieve that? And you've got to doing this in a frequency resonance mechanism. And further, to get my light photons, if it's a construct, electromagnetic construct, then the light photon forms a laser beam in the same way that electrical electrons travel down a wire, right? You need a twisted pair to stop cross pair talk and all the rest of it, but the electrons travel in a double helix, one moving clockwise, the other moving anti-clockwise along the wire on the outside. And on the inside, you've got a quadpole magnetic field doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. And then I would say inside of that, you have a quadpole magnetic field or Octonian magnetic pole doing the same thing.
Yes,
and then inside of that filament, it goes.
I agree with that completely because it's a fractal knotting process of the behavior of motion.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's all phase conjugate, and it's multiples of golden mean.
So when I talk about an electric discharge, and it doesn't matter what the conduction mechanism is, it can be a plasma, it can be a conductor, it can be air or water, which is a conductor. What happens is you have three types of, at least three elements involved. First of all, there's the aethic setup of the circuit, right? So the Aether particles that build all matter structure, they form a conduit along the conductor. And then light, the electromagnetic radiation in the form of photons, travels in that conduction channel at a speed that the medium will permit. So if we're in free space, we're traveling at the designated speed of light in a vacuum. If we're traveling in a copper wire, then we're 1% slower, and so on. But the photons, right? And this is not well published. Photons travel inside the conductor. If you were able to watch correctly, and they've done these experiments, and there are papers out there that say that the light photon can travel inside the photon. And then the electrons are traveling around the outside in a double helix arrangement, flowing forwards and backwards. But because there's a dominant direction, you'll get this positive to negative flow, or negative to positive flow, depending on your perspective.
And it's all the same time. There's charge and idea and memory that can cascade along this fabric. This fabric-like type of thing.
Think about it. Because I've got a matter structure like copper wires and devices all around it, I've got this conduit channel already set up. It's already primed to carry an electrical discharge, a magnetic electrical discharge. And like when I hit the switch, the lights are instantly on. It doesn't matter how big my scale is. You can be a microcircuit, an atomic nanocircuit. You can be a house. You can be a town. You can be a geographic region, a continent. You can be, a stellar system between the star and the planet. That circuit switches on instantly. All right? And the reason why it switches on instantly is the conduction channels have already been set up, ready, primed to go. And for people who want to look up this, Vorcat, Ivorcatt. He was a digital microcircuit expert in the mid 70s. He nearly made it into the rich and famous, but things went wrong. But he has websites. Go out there and have a look and look at what he says about his conclusions in terms of transmission of electromagnetic energy. First of all, you get an electrical discharge, the electron discharge, which is unidirectional, or in the case of DC current, or bidirectional in the case of AC, an oscillating wave mechanism. But what is occurring in that discharge, that electromagnetic discharge of transferring energy from one location to another, is there is a dual magnetic discharge. So there's a magnetic discharge traveling from source to sink and from sink to source. And this is the reason when you look there with your magnet at the wire, you don't see a magnetic field, because the two are passing in the opposite directions to each other and they cancel out.
Yeah.
They disappear.
Yeah.
Or they,
you're explaining wonderfully. This is wonderful.
Or they become so small that they become indetectable, and the only thing you can see is the electrical behavior, and the magnetics is almost invisible. It's there, but you can't see it.
Yeah.
And so in terms of this sort of things, we talk about, I'm just talking about electrics and magnetics as two separate types of charges, but I'm firmly convinced they're not the only ones. And the reason why the reason why this is because our big universe shows characteristics that obey the law of polarity, if you're talking in Ramon's terms, or the law of opposites, if you're talking in my Western culture terms, the European version. And
now, what the
law of opposites means, or the law of polarity, in the case of electrics, we've got negative and positive. In the case of magnetics, we've got north and south. In the case of temperature, we've got hot and cold. In the case of time, we've got the past and the future.
So charge is, so keep going.
So, and that's some physical descriptions. But in the natural world, we have the charge of alive and the charge of dead. We have the charge of food and we have the charge of rotten. We have the charge of male and the charge of female. These things are opposites. And then you have good and evil, love and hate, right? So
love and hate is a charge. Good and evil is a charge.
Yeah.
So these polarities that everybody likes to consider as polarities, it's just opposite ends of the spectrum of charge. And
yes.
And that charge is always flowing to and from circuit and feeding off of circuit, and circuit's
yes.
always building it in real time.
And the flow is bidirectional at all cases. There's always a flow from one location to the other, and it's opposite.
Yeah. And it's all vortex. It's all vortex-based, so it's opposed spiral vortexes.
Well, the comment I make is the only sort of motion that occurs in the universe outside of a diagram is helical. There is no other form of motion. There is no such thing as an elliptical motion. There's no such thing as circular motion. It's all spiral. And I
agree.
So what you get with spiral motions is get an elastic band. Those elastic band driven propeller aircraft, wind up the propeller. What happens to the elastic band? It forms a helical path that knots. One of the things you get from helical travel is knotting.
Yeah.
And because things are flowing in a helical pattern, and it's a negative and electric charges in opposite direction that cancel each other, and all this sort of stuff going on, you're going to get knotting. And because these charges are cancelling each other, I can get two electrical negative charges. So long as I rotate them in opposite directions, they'll cancel from one electric charge looking at the other electric negative charge. The electric negative says, you're positive. But the other electric charge says, oh, I'm negative. You're the one who's positive, because their fields are going in the opposite direction. So they attract the electric charge field of these two charges, even though they're the same and in terms of intensity and value, because they're rotating in opposite directions, the charge and the field shrinks. So the structure can shrink. Right? So When we talk about elastic construction, which is shrinks and expands, what we're talking about is that these charge arrangements cause a diminution in the charge, and the field and the structure shrinks, or it expands because the charge becomes more discriminated, and it expands, and you get oscillating behavior as a result, right? It'll go through an oscillation process. So its frequency of motion and things comes out of the way charges behave in that circumstance. So I'm thinking about, rightio, there's a question in physics that says...
I was just thinking just a minute ago here, Robert, that this reminds me exactly of Walter Russell's, his entire cosmology. This is how he showed everything. Life and death is charge. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but yeah, that's exactly how he showed it.
Well, I developed a lot of this thinking between 2015 to mid 2000. So the end of 2014, December, right through to September 2017, I was doing this, ignoring everything out there in the world that anybody ever wrote, other than what was in my high school physics books. And then in September 2017, I went out starting to look for anybody who'd done anything that was in line with my thinking. And that's when I tripped over the electric universe, David Allen LaPointe, Harton Arp, Anthony Peratt, Don Talbot, and all the rest of these guys. Michael Schumacher, the guy was doing, he's dead now, he was doing the geology stuff with
now I got a brain. Michael Shermer.
Steinbecker, I think it was. Anyway.
Yeah, Michael Steinbecker, that's it.
Yeah, and then you've got others that are in the same ilk, Ken Wheeler and others that are having problems of the same nature that I was having, that the story we're being fed didn't work properly. We're trying to come up with a model that explains the behavior we're observing, why it's present. So, one of the things in physics we say is the universe is supposed to have occurred from a big bang, and we're supposed to have equal creation of positive structure and negative structure, matter, antimatter. Where's all the antimatter? Why are we only seeing positive matter? Where's all the antimatter gone?
Well, that goes along with your theory too, though. I mean, yes. It's charge in both directions, antimatter and matter.
Yeah, right. You need both. You need both to make the construct of a physical particle. So if we were able to look at the Aether structure, and I call it the Aether seed, I call it a chargino because its only characteristic is some sort of confined fluid flow, which I'm describe in a minute. But what the important characteristic, it carries charge, and that charge is necessary when we have a null environment. So in the universe doesn't like null, where there is no charge. If you get two objects that are rotating in sympathy with each other and you try to rotate them at the same speed, they will explode. Right? They don't like doing these sort of things because it takes more and more energy to maintain the structures. So what you've got,
it always seeks an equilibrium.
Yeah. So matter structure has built in a condition for harmony. In other words, it's going to be stable, something that's promoting stability of structure. And at the same time, it's got the same thing promoting the dissolution of structure, instability, right? When stability is stronger than instability, you get a stable structure. When it's reversed, the structure falls apart. So if it's an unstable structure, it will fall apart. If it's a stable structure, it will hold together, which is why we get radioactive and non-radioactive elements. It's the same thing. It's the structure is not stable, and once the stability structure is being overridden, and it doesn't take much to jiggle the structure that's unstable to make it fall apart. So, using this statement of like charges rotating in opposite directions, if we look at the structure of the photon, how do we get a structure that is going from a positive maximum to a negative maximum? What's going on? what sort of dynamism in the structure can we have, or would there be, to enable that behavior to occur? And this is where I bring in a term called eversion. And I'll make a very important point here. What eversion is it's turning a structure fully inside out. And by doing that, what I mean is get yourself a tetrahedron, work out where the centroid is, and make the centroids the outside of the tetrahedron and put your vertices inside, and keep the rule that your vertices and your centroids remain at the same distance. Now, the mathematics to do that is difficult and not well, I don't think it's been actually achieved. But whoever does this is going to solve a geometrical problem with construction. So, what we have in a structure is a tetrahedron. Minimum construction element of anything is a tetrahedron. And what we have in the chargino is a flow around the base structure. So it goes like those Celtic trifoils with ring, right? You have a flow that's occurring in the trifoil, and the structure turns its inside out and becomes a spherical toroid, which is why we get the ring. So what's happening is that the electron, the chargino, is going from the trifoil flow tetrahedron to the ovoid sphere and back again. But this rotation is in one direction. And it has a partner. So I've got one of these charginos that's created that's rotating that way. Its partner is the exact same structure, the exact same charge. The difference is its rotation is in completely the opposite direction. So these two things, when they're looking at each other, one looks positive to the other. So I'm negative and that's positive, but that one over there is negative and I look positive to it. Now those two structures will form together. When they interlock, we now have a positive structure which has a partner negative structure. So we've got matter and antimatter structure locked in together. Two tetrahedrons interlaced with each other form the Merkaba cube, which is a cube, a six-sided cube if you just look at the vertices. Or it's an eight-pointed star, the Star of David. Right? These ancient images have been around for a long time, and all the archaeologists say it's all religious. No, it's not. It's what we understood about matter 10 to 20,000 years ago, and we're only rediscovering it. Now, in the case of the proton, the structure is a bit more complex, and what we get is the four-leaf trifoil arrangement where you've got four lobes and a ring system, right? And the reason why it's four is it's still tetrahedral, but there's many more tetrahedrons involved. So in the electron, we've got three tetrahedrons that are witch hat arranged around each other. The middle one is counter-rotating to the two outside ones, which is what makes it electrically negative. You've got three parts of it all electrically negative. So 3 bits of negative turns into 1 charge. Right? In the case of the proton, that stack is 17 high at least, and it's positive. It's an antimatter structure. It's the reverse. Okay. So all and the reason why the proton is way heavier is it takes more of the positive structure to create a stable structure that won't just fall apart.
Right, there's that preponderance again.
All right, but the negative structure and the positive structure in terms of charge differential are not the same. They're different. And Millikan oil drop experiment was done at a time when they knew about the electron, but they did not know about the proton. Ashcroft, an Austrian scientist at the time, who did much more determined experiments and went after Millikan saying he was just making it up. And later discoveries showed that he cherry-picked his data and to make it look sexy because he wanted a Nobel Prize. And the person most important in his discoveries who happened to be a black African who wanted his PhD, got sidelined and nothing out of it, really, other than, he helped him. But he was critical. Now, the design of that experiment produced a false understanding. All right? So I'll describe the experiment. What they had was a container with a aperture in it, with a microscope, with a graded scale on it, so they could, measure how the diameter of an oil drop and how fast it fell and all that sort of stuff. they put a positive and negative field above it. So they put a dipole electric field structure, right? So, and then they had a grating system and an atomizer. And so they get a perfume atomizer, they get the oil and they squirt it out, and out comes all these tiny little droplets that then fall through the grate. And the grate is electrically charged. And it falls through the oil. The oil falls through the grate, as long as, you know, they're small enough and don't muck up the grate. And electric charge is transferred from the grate to the oil drop, and it then under gravity falls towards the ground. But we set up an electric field and we make it hover. And we know how fast it's falling, so we can do some calculations in maths to work out how heavy it is. And then we can make it rise, so we can work out some, you know, mathematics in the electricals to make it hover. But this is in an environment where you've got free air floating, so you need to account for Brownian motion, which mucks things up. And then there's leakage of electrical charge into the environment, so it's got to be dry and all sorts of weird stuff. And it's a very, very, very difficult experiment to set up. And you can sit down there and measure, you know, thousands of, you know, measure at least 2,400 droplets before you even start to get statistically meaningful data. And you can work out the electric charge now of the oil drop. So the first thing is they made the grate plate negative, charge negative, so the oil drop went through, and it acquired electrons as it went through. And they did all their measures and wrote all their data down. Didn't do a good job at that, but anyway, it's a difficult experiment to do. And in 1909, the year they were doing it, it was been incredibly difficult because, you know, we don't have the fancy tools. And then they changed the grating, so they made it positive, the grating positive. How do you make an electric grating positive? Well, you remove the electrons. The oil drop falls through the plating, and electrons get removed off the oil drop and put onto the plating. And they fall down, and they do all these experiments. And because the oil drops have now acquired a positive charge due to electric negative electrons disappearing, they make measurements of the oil drop and get their positive charge results with their negative charge results. The problem is, and this has not been recognized by anybody until 2015 when I complained about it to a research group that went away and redid the experiment and confirmed that I was correct, is that experiment only ever measured the presence of additional electrons or the absence of electrons. It never, ever, ever measured the value of a proton because we weren't adding protons and taking protons off the oil drop. Okay. So we never measured the value of a proton. For 100 years, we have never, ever measured. And when I pointed this out to the research group who had the equipment, I said, there are two ways to work it out. We get hydrogen atoms and ionize it, and we track the motion of the proton and the motion of the electron, and we determine the charges based on the known vortex behavior of rotation and how fast they travel and all that sort of stuff. Right? We've got enough smarts at least to figure that mathematics out reasonably well. That's one way of doing it. The second way is we just get a neutron emitter and we put it through as clear a vacuum as we can achieve. And there is no such thing as a pure vacuum, not even a good vacuum, because there's always the Aether that occupies the volume. But anyway, you drop your neutrons into this environment and they'll dissociate over, you know, a couple of minutes. The half-life of a neutron, if it's not involved in an atom, it will fall apart because it's not stable. And in that process, you track the electrons and the protons again, and you'll find that their motion in the environment will produce the results. So and I made this prediction in 2015, that the value for the electric charge would be confirmed, and the value for the proton charge would be discovered, and it would not be equal to the electric negative charge with sign change. And I've been told anecdotally, and I'd love to have the paper that I could claim truth to it, is that the difference between those two charges is that if I add to the proton charge the value of phi, the golden rule, over 2 to the electric positive charge and then change signs the whole thing, I will get the negative electric charge. And that explained all sorts of things to me. What most people don't realize is that they think the neutron is a neutral particle. It's not. It's slightly negative, ever so much. It's slightly magnetic, ever so much. And the reason why is the electric negative charge is slightly stronger than the electric positive charge. It's not an exact cancellation. It's an almost cancellation. And to balance out that structure, to make it stable, it has to get another matter structure that it can make up the difference. And the best matter structure it can lay its hands on is the light photon, which is a structure. So we see, when we look at the mass of a neutron, we see it is 2 electron masses bigger than the proton. So we have a proton mass, we have an electron mass, and we have a group of photon masses that equal an electron mass. And between the lot of them, they cancel out the charge, almost. I mean, that's important because it adds to the stability of the atomic structure. And here at this point, I've discovered SAM. And if you want any further evidence on how this stuff goes together and why atoms grow like trees, go to the SAM structured atom model, guys, and learn something brand new. And you will discover a model that now works with an underlying reason for construction. So we have our positive structure, which is really the antimatter structure, and we have our negative structure, which is really the matter structure. But for the when we get a positive charge like a proton and we add it to the electron, we still have electrical charge. It never goes away. The magnetic dipoles never go away. The thing doesn't destroy itself and disappear. But we have light photons that turn into muons and electrons, you know, opposite antimatter structure. And when those two things join back together, we get a photon.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to say is it's two
images I'd love to share along to describe it.
Yeah, there are 2 types of antimatter structure. There's an antimatter structure where charge is reversed. The constructional geometry of that structure is the same, but the charge direction is reversed. So electric structure, when we talk about an electric monopole, it's actually a dipole. On the inside of the structure is the other pole. So if it's an electric negative particle, the electric dipole that we see is the negative one, but the positive one's inside. And the reason why it's inside is because of this cancellation mechanism. Because the positive part of the dipole is in opposite rotation, it creates a monopole structure. So the electron is a structure. It's you know, probably a 13-part structure or something along those lines, because 13 seems to be the magic number for an electron. For the proton, it's a 47-part structure. But again, the positive part of that field structure is pointing outwards. The negative part is inside. And the way it's rotating in relation with each other, motion, movement, is the negative, or the structure of the proton is actually pulling the structure together and creating stability with the positive part of the field facing out. So the way I think about electric fields is, imagine you've got a Mobius strip. On one side of the surface, it's positive. On its opposite side, immediately, you know, go straight through the strip on the other side, it's negative. And there's this thing that this charged dipole races around this belt. And there's 3 of them. And this creates this Mobius strip. Now, the electron and proton are 3-dimensional objects, so it's actually a Conian bottle. But it's not a 3-dimensional object. That's a simplex model. In other words, it exists in dimensions 3 and 5 and 7 simultaneously as a singleton particle. It's not, you know, time is not a dimension of the universe. It's very important for people to understand. Particles, if we take the traditional mathematical treatment of dimensions, they talk about, you know, the 3 dimensions of space plus the dimension of time. But you can't, if time is a dimension in the manner they talk about maths, about in mathematics, then a particle would be like a tube stretching from the past to the future.
Do you see what's on the image? Do you see the screen?
Yeah, I see those.
It is these tubes, and this is like what you were talking about. You can go in and out of it, and it's a cascading resonant reservoir. But what's happening is it's a repeating Bessel function. Ultimately, it's a repeating Bessel function. So the whole thing can happen with nothing moving.
Yes. So in this process, I'm saying that, well, first of all, we've got the law of opposites. And we're saying, from my point of view, they're effectively a charge, which is why we've got good and evil at our large structure, male and female, and positive and negative electricity, and north-south magnetics, and all the rest of it, right? Life and death and all the rest. So it's something that is, because fractal geometry and fractal behavior is whatever you have in the structure at the seed is now inherited by all the structure that seed creates. So it doesn't matter whether you're a charged particle at the base, the aethic seed, or the chargino. It doesn't matter whether you're the photon. It doesn't matter whether you're the atom. It doesn't matter whether you're a planetary body or a stellar star system or a galaxy. All the behavior you will see at the seed is replicated. And the only thing that changes is the sort of thing at the scale boundaries. And if you watch some of these Mandelbrot sets, like your diagrams, you'll see this repeating pattern. And as you zoom in, it repeats. The pattern repeats. It's a nested
fractality. It's fractal. Charge is fractal. It's fractality. There's not only one way that it creates itself. There's many ways that it creates itself, but the way that it comes off the sun and creates bodies around the sun, like angels and our higher body, our higher form, is actually existing in the Van Allen belts, I believe, and helps sustaining all other things through the auroras. But continue.
I think everything, right? What people don't realize, and homeopathy gets a bad rap, but there's a science paper out there done with an homeopath done in the 1930s. He was paid to go away and prove the claim that water did not remember what was in it. And what he ended up proving, that water does remember what's in it. Now, the Aether is like, right? So that's for water. The water is the best, closest model to the Aether that we have. There might be other compounds that do this, but the Aether is the same thing. And if we're talking about where does our consciousness exist, where is our being, when our body dies, what happens to what makes me Robert or you, Buddy, or whatever, that essence lives in the Aether. We are somehow connected to it. So I think our bodies are like a massively complex TV set that connects us to our reality. And we exist as an avatar in our dimensional structure we call life and living on the earth.
Yeah, this would be like similar to what Walter Russell says. A simulation. It's a simulation. It's seeming motion. Everything is a seeming action. It's happening. It's a play.
It's not a simulation. It's not a holographic arrangement. It's actually a real construction. It's just we become immersed in a reality structure. And it's a real structure. It's not, the Matrix. It's
a living, breathing, organic, two-way pulsing living system.
And this is where I come to the conclusion that God is the universe in its totality. Mm-hmm. And God is expressed in the seed structure of the universe, and therefore is inherited by all matter structure that exists, which is why he is everywhere, all powerful, all knowing, because he is the universe, the sum total of everything, from the ancient past to the ancient future. If there is a boundary on that, I don't know, but I suspect there isn't. So the consequence is that from that point of view, the universe becomes instantly infinite. But it's going to get worse. But further, when we go past that particular structure, God forms us, if you want to talk about the Aether forms us. So we are part of God, and the way the universe learns itself is from us. So we form God, God forms us. It's a bidirectional relationship, which is why you have these understandings of ancient religions, that we are part of the environment and the environment. There is a flow between us. And that's very important for people to understand. So, you know, do we want proof that there is a God? Well, there's a universe. If that's not proof enough for you, well, you're not accepting the evidence. Go away. Bother somebody else. Is the religious view of the universe the correct view? No. Why? We're a finite being. There's no way we can understand everything.
I beg to differ. I think that we can plug right directly into this this tube here that we're talking about, and we won't know everything. I think that's what heaven is partially reserved for, at least in a lot of scriptures, is that you'll eternally know God and know the system more and more, which also is reminiscent in reincarnation.
Yeah, but we're also learning and in the process creating the knowledge of the universe. The only thing that's expanding in a big bang sense is the understanding. Everything else is infinite. And if you how do you learn if you know all? You can't. You know, you need separation or discreteness. You can't be. You got to be constrained before you can understand well. You know, if you could do anything, what would you learn? Nothing, because you can do anything. You don't have to learn anything. But the only way we can learn is we aren't able to do everything. So, you know, while everybody wants the genie and the magic wand and the magic bullet and all the rest of it, you can never have it because you're not going to learn if you have it. You know, you just forget. You shouldn't be participating in our environment, which is about learning. So, when does school start? The instant you're conceived. When does it end? The instant you die. And at that point, you have an exam. Did you pass? If the answer's no, get to go again. If the answer's yes, move on. Right?
So and what we're looking at here is the solar system.
Yes.
And the solar system as a birkeland current, and Don Scott is surfing on it.
Well, that thing is true, but what people don't realize is that is a nested helical structure. There are helicals within the helical paths, within the helical paths. There are no circles, there are no cones, there are no ellipses. It's all helical stuff. It's all, you know, the reason why the golden ratio, we know about it, and the reason why we know about pi is those two numbers, which I think are prime numbers, are inbuilt into the structure of the universe. So what is the structure of this seed particle? Well, I reckon it's a simplex. A simplex is a multi-dimensional tetrahedron. The reason why I claim that that's the case is that triangle, the tetrahedron, is one of the only three structures, geometric structures that tessellate and fill the entire volume of space. The other ones are the cube and the isomer cube. Right? If I get two tetrahedrons and I interlock them, I create the Merkaba cube. And if I look at the vertices of the Merkaba cube, I have a cube. So tetrahedrons will produce the cube directly.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, we talk about that, and then you can get a space filling structures, things like that.
And tessellation in all dimensions is important. And there's a file, a video presentation by Number Files, which he writes the number 0, 1, infinity, 5, 6, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 to infinity. What is he describing in that video? Because he says, here's the sequence. What is it? And the answer is the number of regular polytopes that occur, that create tessellation. So in dimension 0, there is no tessellation. In dimension 1, there's only one tessellation. That's the location. In dimension 2, you've got triangles and squares and polygons and the hexagon structure and shapes that are not regular polygons like birds and fish and other things. And you see this in tile mosaics everywhere around the world. You know, it's an art form. You'll have it in your diagrams. And the number of tessellations, shapes that you can have in 2 dimensions is infinite. But when we get to 3 dimensions, there's only 5. There's the tetrahedron, there is the cube, there is the octahedron, there is the dodecahedron, the 12-sided, and there's the icosahedron, 20 sides.
But we show it through our shows in the geometric view. We have shown and proven that the icosadodeca can become a space-filling, cascading system that actually opens like the isotropic vector matrix, which is you can actually create these little cavities, all points from one point to another are equidistant, but you can create space-filling structures with what did he call it?
Anyway, I agree with you. I'm aware of this and I'm accepting it. There's one other structure in 3 dimensions called the teapot. And what the teapot is, this structure we're looking at right here on the video. It is a helical structure that creates a toroid, and a toroid has one hole and a ring. So I can get a teacup and I can turn it into a donut and I can turn it into all sorts.
I remember the word. It's a rhombic tricontrahedron. So you can get that tiling. So there's an A3 structure framework in space when you're latticing and creating space lattices and fractal grids. There's an A3. And this is important if we want to do space colonization and the design of self-replicating, self-building structures in space.
Yes. And this stuff is expressed in DNA. It's expressed in atoms. It's expressed in the solar system, in the galaxy. It's expressed everywhere. It's a repeating structure that occurs everywhere. So is an atom a living thing? Probably. The Aether is definitely a living thing. We're a living biological thing. The planet's a living thing. The solar system's a living thing. It just depends on what your definition of life is as to which is the case. But anyway, what's important to understand is that, and this comes from Nassim Haramein, and everybody didn't like it, but what he did was this diagram. Effectively, when he did this, he upset the astronomers because he showed the proper motion of the planets on the solar system as a helical pathway. And all the scientists said, this is all the astronomers out there were...
Don't give Nassim credit for that. That's old. That's
but he published it.
Alice Bailey came up with that, as far as I'm concerned. And it was the serpentine.
Fine. But he did other things.
People. There was pre-Socratic philosophers. I was just showing you a book, a good book, by Vladimir Ginsburg, that goes through the vortex history of vortex scientists. And a lot of people came up with this theory way before Nassim Haramein.
But
people get
what I'm going to say, before we just diss him, remember he did one very important thing, and he did a whole series of geometric arrangements, and he comes up with a 64 grid.
That wasn't him either. That was Buckminster Fuller that came up with that. He popularized it. So
at least he kept the idea alive, right? In a time when people didn't want anybody to know. So the issue here is that all these structures we're talking about in the terms of platonics, they are all creatable directly from the tetrahedron. So I'd say the tetrahedron is the fundamental one. It's the fundamental one for construction in our universe. And
I'd say spheres, but okay.
well, in the universe, because there's no other universe, it's just the one thing. Universe meaning one, and verse all that is. So, you know, multiverse and all that stuff is really a logic nonsense. So, but anyway, back to this. So I'm saying the structure that is construction in the seed, the base particle of the universe, is a tetrahedral simplex. And this is where I start to run into problems because I have no concept of what is really going on. But what we have is a structure of some sort of material. I don't know what. But what I do know is it has no substructure to it at all. It's just the same thing. And what it appears to be is an infinitely long material. You know, if you want to think about it as in terms of string, but it has no components, wrapped in a helical path that travels in direction from the past to the future, from the infinite past to the infinite future. It travels through a pathway around the simplex tetrahedron in the same manner that's described with the Celtic trifoil, and that structure is also shown in other cultures. It's not just something that the Celtics had, the Irish had, or the Norse had. It was there in the Egyptians and the Indian and the Asian cultures as well. This is known by everybody way back when, before the world was destroyed. But this is not the first time we've had technology of like that we've got today.
It's the vine, it's the life, it's the way, it's the current, it's the energy.
Anyway, so this structure it's a simplex, and the simplex has a rotational dynamic that allows the simplex to go from a tetrahedral structure to turn itself fully inside out, creating an ovoid spherical structure. It's closer to an egg, almost pure sphere egg, but it is a toroid. In other words, there's a void through the toroid from one side to the other, right? And the same applies to the simplex. There's a void in the structure that enables this structure to turn itself totally inside out. And that process of turning the inside to the outside and the outside to the inside is called eversion. And there is some, I would say, infantile or preschool mathematics, if we want to talk about mathematics in those terms, understanding of that eversion process. You know, nobody, to my personal knowledge, has been able to turn any structure totally inside out. And if they can do that, they deserve to be the Nobel laureate in mathematics, because that is something that is beyond my skill. But I will say this: the process of doing it will be incredibly simple. There'll be a lot of calculation, but the rules are going to be simple. And what you're showing here is this nested fractality. It's a feature of this seed structure. It is built in. But this structure,
umbilical. It's umbilical. It's a cascade.
Yeah, but it's a phi trace cascade, which means that as I travel along this path, I will never intersect myself anywhere along that path ever. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter how far I travel, never intersect, never cross.
Yeah, and nor will any of the atoms, because they're surrounded by these fields, by space, by the charge and the current is pushing away from every other point, moving in opposite directions, counterclockwise or counter-rotating directions.
Well, it's doing both rotations, counterclockwise and clockwise, as well as longitudinally forward and backwards and vibration.
There's a flow into the circuit, and then there's a flow out of the circuit. And what you see here is there's a whole web. There's a cobweb of it, and it's all interlocking. The science of this is actually called Skermions and Skermionics. I just found this out. Usually there's always a science to what I'm doing. I find a whole field dedicated to it eventually.
Well, what that tells me is the universe is still trying to tell us the truth, even though everybody's trying to suppress it.
Indeed.
And that's what I've discovered in my process. I've found that when I went looking for similar thinking, I found other people that were thinking along the lines of similar. And David Allen Lapointe with his photon model, he's only focused on magnetics because it's all that matters. Well, yes, magnetics, if you use magnetics, you can create electrical behavior from it, magnetic behavior. But the simple fact is there's two sets of behavior. There's not one. And
this is all that's happening. This is just what you were talking about. So you start with regular polyhedra, all the way to the left here. And then the second row, you have them nested inside of each other infinitesimally. This creates charge. This is what lightning is composed of, because charge seeks edges, so it creates the geometry. As charge moves, it creates edges.
Well, actually, what charge produces is the double layer of the plasma.
Yes, and as it does that, it spirals out along these filaments. But all you have really is you have these nested polygons, which is the inverse. So you have it, at the top you have inverse triangular. The second you have inverse square. The third you have inverse pentagonal. The second inverse hexagonal. When charge is stable on our body, everyone has a charge. It's in the octagonal state. But when you touch someone, the charge becomes hexagonal. If the charge differential creates a spark and you get a shock, then that charge on your body becomes a hexagonal funnel, a two-way vortex tunnel of charge through that spark that you get when you get shot.
The whole process is designed to equalize charge-wise the bodies involved.
So
people talk about instant love, right? Boy meets girl, boy and girl kiss, and suddenly they're head over heels. Now I reckon that's the biological equivalent of this.
Right. Because like attracts like, so the charge pulls together.
Well,
it's not in the opposite to attract. It's like.
Well, not really. In biology, you want diversity to guarantee, future stability. So
true, but you see
when you talk to people that have got into marriage and all the rest of it, it's like opposites attract, and it seems to work. They get together, they have kids, they have a life that seems to be pretty reasonable, unless they get snotty with each other, and it's the fact that they're not the same that makes that thing work. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here. But
let me continue real quick so I can show you exactly what this diagram is. Real quick.
Hi, Andrew.
So then you on the third row here, you have circumscribed regular polygons. Once you circumscribe the polygons, you have the Bessel function. Every one of these Bessel functions is exactly how energy works, and builds itself through projective geometry and progression. Arithmetic and geometric progression can only happen because of phi. Phi, or the golden ratio, is the solution to geometric progression, which ends up building these cascading resonance chambers that not only orchestrate the constructive and destructive wave interference, that's what builds reality, is this particle zoo of. And guess what this is? This is nothing more than repeating the exact same Bessel function, like you said. It's the same thing repeated on multiple scales.
Yes.
That's what builds up reality. Reality all of reality that we understand here, and all, excuse me, all light, electromagnetism, gravity, sound, everything. Well, sound works a little bit different as well, but everything uses the inverse square law, so inverse cube law, and that is what the square is here, the second one down. And this is the cascade that I've been studying only for 18 years. And that's what reality is composed of, is these fractal neural networks. And we can go into these fossilized fractal networks, and we will we'll be able to go into and out of the future. Because of the fact of what the universe is made of, we will be able to experience being the umwelt of different beings. We'll be able to be their worldview.
Well,
so that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, that's fine. Can I say that God, the concept of now for God, or the universe, is everything between the infinite past and the infinite future happening in an instant, immediate. For us,
well, that's like saying eternity is in the moment. Eternity is always now. It's a cascading eternity of always.
All right. So this is the reason why you can say God knows all that's ever been and all that ever will, because he exists in an environment where the distant future and the distant past are just now. There is no charge separation for him. But anyway, back to our structure. So back to our structure.
Yeah.
In physics, we're talking about the Big Bang. Well, the Big Bang, for a variety of reasons, is a myth. It's Platonic astronomy and Platonic physics, right? To understand Platonic physics, right, we got the universe that was observed by human beings in the past from one planet's observational point of view. And from that planet's observational view, because the planet was rotating, but they didn't know that, everything around them rotated. About the Earth, all things rotated. And when they looked out to their horizon, the world was as flat as a tack. And so therefore, the world had to be a flat disk standing on something, and the whole universe rotated around us and all the rest of it. Well, that was because of one point of view. But the Greeks went to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians knew more than the Greeks ever did, and the Greeks learned what they'd forgotten because of a destruction in their past. And you end up with some Greeks working out that the world was a round disk, that it was a round spheroid, that the moon was a round spheroid. What they didn't come to grips with was the fact that the Earth was rotating in a helical structure around the sun. Copernicus and others, I mean, they certainly had that argument back in Greek times, the ancient Greeks.
Yeah, pre-Socratic.
That they had two models of the universe. One model was the flat Earth and everything around it revolved. The other model was a spherical Earth, and it rotated around a star, and all the rest of it. But it wasn't until
Vortex model,
wasn't until we got to Kepler when he started doing his laws of planetary motion, and hats off to that guy. He stumbled across the ellipse. It's a shame that he didn't have stumbled across the helix, because he would have got a better result. Anyway, but he was fundamental to Copernican revolution that occurred after him, which was that the Earth was the planet in motion around the star. And it's only in modern times that we've worked out that the star is in motion around in a galaxy, traveling in a helical vortex path with all its planets and all the rest of it. So, the arguments about it. But anyway, that structure is, there were two ways of interpreting the data. One was correct, and one was not correct, but more right than wrong. And the other one was totally wrong. And the reason why there was a big argument, and it's come back and haunt us, is because the religion believed in the one that was wrong, and they said it was divinely ordered and therefore dogmatically true. And then you got evidence that shows that it's all bullshit. So the authority of the religion disappears because it's relying on something that is not true at all. The mistake was religion choosing the wrong model. But anyway, you're not going to get rid of the religion element in this thing, because without religion we wouldn't have science, and without science we wouldn't have religion. So the two are co-joined, and they express another opposite or polarity. And what you've got objective evidence and subjective evidence. The objective evidence is what you have measured with experiment. The subjective evidence is what you speculate and make assumptions about and logic. And when these two meet in balance, we get a speculation solution that appears to relate to our experience, that correlates to our experience. It might not necessarily be correct, but at least it agrees. And in Platonic astronomy and the alchemy and all that sort of stuff, you had that result. And then along comes the Enlightenment and upsets the apple cart with a different model. And now we've got into the science model where it's all become dogmatic and religious, and the truth seems to die in the ditch. So anyway, in the process of describing this, I've come to the conclusion that because the Aether is like water and we have ocean streams racing through it like in a conduit like a laser beam would, the photon itself must be a construct. It cannot be a wave. The construct, we know because of this oscillation mechanism, appears to have wave-like behavior because it has internal oscillation and motion, and it will express wave behavior. But it is not a wave. It is a construct that expresses a wave, and it is a construct that expresses particle. So with the double slit experiment, right, everybody's saying, oh, it's got to be a wave because of blah, blah, blah. And it's not true. What we know is that the structure of a light is incredibly small. We don't even know how big a light construction is, let alone the photon. But when we're firing a laser beam at the slits, we know that if the slit distance is smaller than the field extent of the photon will split, will become a photon and a positive structure and an anti-structure, and it will split and go through two different slits and join up on the other side, and weird behavior occurs. But what people don't realize is that the light itself, the structure itself, is an electromagnetic field structure, a confined, self-confined electromagnetic field structure, passing another self-confined matter structure, which we call the slit boundaries. And if the photon travels close to the edge, the magnetic and electric fields will interact with each other at action at a distance, spooky action, because these two particles don't actually interact. The fields overlap their constructional generator, and you'll get an interaction. So the light, as it goes past the edge, is going to be pulled by the matter in a direction and pushed in the matter by a direction and will be deflected. And you'll get, at the screen, at some distance away, you'll get all these interference patterns occur. It's because the light's straight path helical structure, well, it's not exactly a straight path, but it's a helical curve that's fairly straight.
It's meandering.
Over the distance we're talking about. So we think it's a straight line, but it's not. It's actually a curved helical pathway. But that pathway will deflect because it's come within the boundary of another matter structure which it can interact with. Mm-hmm. Which is why when we see light go through through media or near media, it will bend because of these field interactions. It will be refracted, it will be reflected, and it will be diffracted, and it will be absorbed. They're the four things that will happen to the light. All right, I'll get to the fourth one in a minute, but the first three, reflection, refraction, and diffraction, where it spreads, are all driven by the field interactions, the particles' fields interacting with each other because they're overlapping the construction itself. It's this interaction boundary I talk about. And if we wanted to talk about the geometry of a light photon, imagine you got an electron. You stick it where the sun is. The field boundary of the sun, of the photon on the scale, is at the heliopause, and it's only an electron thick. And it's that boundary, electron thick at the heliopause, it's got to interact with matter in the same manner for it to have an interaction. Which is why the electromagnetic radiation photon, we call, travels through space at the speed it does, because the environment stops it from going any farther faster or slower because it's both pushing it and pulling it, and it's like it's met the point where the slipperiness and the friction have matched each other exactly, and it just travels at that speed. And it will change if it changes the media through which it travels. So if I'm going through space, I travel at maximum speed because I'm only interacting with the Aether, and the interaction time is very short because we're traveling at a pretty high velocity. But if I hit, say, a plasma cloud, I'm going to have other interactions. Like I get taken off my path, I get slowed down because there's more electromagnetic field structure to interact with me. I could be absorbed, creating, a neutron structure, and then get re-emitted, and all sorts of things go on. But the speed of the light through the material will change for all the photons involved. The number of photons that get deflected and absorbed and reflected and all the rest of it might be small, and most of the light travels through, but it still changes the speed of the light photon in the process. So as it's coming in, it slows down because the fields are pushing it away. And as it's going out, it speeds up because the fields are pushing it away. These things interact, and it's spooky action at a distance in the quantum model. And it's because of the electrodynamic field interaction with the particle charge structure. And these two things go together. So slippery and friction, slippery and stick are polarities, opposites, right? So if I want to go faster than the speed of light, I just need to be able to make it so that my electromagnetic field structure, or whatever goes into making my fields, or the charge structure I have, if I can make that look like it's not there for all the rest of the matter I'm traveling through, I can travel at any speed I want. The speed of light is not a limit for me. It's not a limit for any matter. And the gravitational speed calculations done in the 1800s said that the gravity interaction field, what they were determining the speed of gravity, as it were, is at least 11 times the speed of light. So when the quantum modelists out there and the astrophysicist says gravity travels at the speed of light, they're lying. They're absolutely lying. And there's empirical proof that they're lying. The speed of gravity has to be at 11 times the speed of light. And they did that without the electric fancies of the did in the 1800s. So things do travel faster than the speed of light. Tachyons, which are supposed to be particles traveling through the speed of light, when they interact with matter, cause weird things. Is that possible?
Longitudinal sound waves.
How fast can something move? Sound waves can travel at the speed of light if there is a dense enough material to allow that to occur. Right? A black hole cannot be a singularity, a zero-dimensional location. Right? The reason being is you can't get a three-dimensional structure or a five-dimensional structure or any dimensional non-zero and shove it into the zero dimension and still have that structure available to you. You're not going to have a three-dimensional solid if you put it into a zero dimension. You're going to destroy characteristical information. So the black hole argument is, from a logical point of view, total rubbish. It's wrong. And Schrödinger equation and Hilbert's treatment of his mathematics, there was mistakes in Hilbert's mathematics. And Arthur Eddington needed a model to promote his gas ball stellar model for the sun. He lied in his 19 eclipse observations because it could be explained with standard optics, because he wanted to protect his precious model. He was prepared to falsify the evidence because he wanted, his Royal Society British medal and his eminent position in astronomy and all the rest of that sort of stuff. He sold his soul to the devil, and he's a plagiarist. All the good things he might have done are just destroyed by the fact that he was not prepared to tell the truth, and he lied. And I'm calling him a fraud. And people that can come after me if they want. And the simple fact is, you cannot continue to lie and have that work. So is the sun a gas ball? No. Is it the sort of model that Robert Tilley wants, which is a plasma ball of sort of things? Well, he's on the right track, but it's also wrong. The sun, like the Earth, is a planet that has an ionized atmosphere in which above that atmosphere you've got an electromagnetic plasma structure, the ionosphere. In the case of the sun, it's the corona. That's where nuclear fusion happens. That's where nuclear fission happens. That's where the elements occur. When we look at the sun, we see all the elements that we can see on the Earth because they're in the corona being created while we watch. And it's been created by an electromagnetic discharge into the sun from outside the solar system and from the sun to the Earth, where the same process is occurring. If we go up into our ionosphere, we will find nuclear reactions. We'll find fusion. We'll find fission. The Earth, by definition of this same behavior, becomes a star. Why? It's got an active rotating electromagnetic field that supports an ionosphere that allows for nuclear fusion, and therefore it's a net producer of energy, and it shines. It might not shine as well as the sun does, but it shines. It doesn't shine as well as Jupiter does, but it shines. Jupiter's a star. Saturn's a star. Neptune's a star. Uranus is a star. Mars is a star. Not a very good one. Venus is becoming a star. And it's a hot body at the moment. But anyway, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that we go. And you could probably argue that the moon and the asteroids and all the rest of it, if they've got an atmosphere and a rotating electromagnetic field structure with an ionosphere, yeah, they're very small stars. So you end up with an observation where you say you've got the repeated structure. It's just the case of scale and inputs involved that turns it into, our classification systems. So getting back to the Aether structure, I have a tetrahedral simplex that allows itself to turn inside out and become an ovoid, a spherical ovoid or an egg ovoid. And what is occurring is the insides of the tetrahedron become the outsides of the ovoid, and the outsides of the tetrahedron become the insides of the ovoid. So when we see the Celtic symbol of that trifoil with a ring, what we're seeing is this process happening so fast that if we were to look at one of these things, we would see the trifoil and the ovoid simultaneously, because we can't discriminate the clock switch. It's that fast. It just looks like both are there present. In the light photon, what we have is four electrical charges. Two are positive in counter rotation in a tetrahedral simplex that are locked together in a Merkaba cube. One half is turned inside out, the other half is positive, and that structure is rotating in one direction. So one half of it's becoming turned inside out, the other half is being turned back into the simplex, and it's rotating through in a one-directional arrangement, which gives us this maximum positive to a maximum negative, so on, cycle. You've got that in this transformation process. But the light photon doesn't just occur with a negative construction. It occurs with a positive construction. And the positive half of the construction is constructionally the same as the negative half. The only difference is the direction of the charge. So for the negative half, it's the negative dipole that's facing out. And for the positive part of it, it's the positive dipole that's facing out. So the light photon consists of a particle and its anti-structure, anti-charge. So it's a charge and an anti-charge together. There's four of them. And this thing is like a piece of wire. You'll get the same field geometries of electrical travel. The electricity is traveling in a clockwise and an anti-clockwise direction in the structure towards you and away from you. The magnetic field is creating the internal magnetic fields you would see in a wire. The whole structure is fractal. It's turning itself inside out, and it's racing away through the universe, self-propelled. And the reason being is that David Allen LaPointe, in his video, made a very important understanding to me. It is that the structure is creating two pole magnetic fields, one facing north and south away from the center. In the center is your structure. Between these two magnetic fields, he's not actually shown it, is two electrical disks. One side's positive, the other disk is negative, right? But because they're in counter rotation, they could be both negative and one looks positive to the other. And then coming out of the axis of this structure, and I think there's 12, at least 12, is a fibril, like a filament. But that's the temperature filament. And if you're looking at the photon in the exact right spot, you'd look at it and it would look cold. If you looked at it in the exact opposite direction, it would look hot. And so what you've got is a construct that has arranged itself. The temperature filament, one side's hot, one side's cold. You got the magnetic, which is north and south, and you got this positive negative disk structure in the middle. And because the electric negative is more powerful than electric positive, it will be chasing the positive. And the positive will be pulling it. But it's also dragging the negative. So we've got positive in front, negative behind. Now with the magnetics, it's north that's strong and south that's weak. So south goes with the positive side and north goes with the negative side. So north is chasing south and south is dragging north. And then you've got the hot and cold. And hot is, I think, forward and in the direction of travel, and cold is in the direct, no, other way around. Cold is in the direction you're traveling in, and hot is in the opposite direction. Hot is chasing cold because hot goes to cold. So what you got is the photon is you got hot chasing cold, north chasing south, negative chasing positive. And from the other side, it's hot pulling cold, south pulling north, and positive pulling, and the thing just goes blip straight through. You can travel self.
And consciousness is the outer ethereal construct of this, the greater mind, and even the mind works in this muscle memory of this figure eight serpentine type of double helical path, as like this image here.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is our current state of science generally, and I'm including all of science at this point, medical and everything. We have just only got into preschool. We're about to go to kindergarten in understanding our universe.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We've only just taken the first baby step because we haven't understood the structures. We haven't understood why this behavior occurs. But I mean, people will come at me and say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." And I'm saying, "Well, with my model, I can explain why the behaviors have to be present. If the photon is an electromagnetic construct and it has the same the same behavior as electrical wires do, and birkeland currents do, and all the rest of it, the laser will form because of electromagnetic field construction requirements where they cancel. And when they cancel, the photons will condense into a beam and because there are more of them in that volume of space, it becomes way more intense and way more energetic and all the rest of it, because those things are dependent upon the volume, right? Why is the interaction so slow, so diminished? Well, the simple fact is the thing is traveling so damn fast. We're talking 13 meters per second, but we could do it in miles per hour. But we're talking about, we'll use meters per second because that's the science. In 1 second, the light photon will have traveled 299,375 whatever kilometers in 1 second, or meters in 1 second, sorry. That does not allow you much time for these field interactions are being described to actually become real enough to stick. They're enough to slow you down slightly, but they're not enough to stop you until you do experiments. And there's a Dutch researcher who has slowed light down to walking pace. And she started those experiments at the Australian National Uni. The first time I heard of her was she was a research scientist and she was using sodium gas, and she'd got light down to 20 meters per second traveling with sodium and laser beams and switching it on, switching off. Why is this important? Well, computing is for a starter.
Wasn't that ULF, ultra low frequencies?
No, this is about using light to do computing with materials that are exotic. You know, if you can slow light down to 20 meters per second from 300 million almost, you can do all sorts of amazing things. And light, unlike electrical currents, is not going to be as heating to the environment of your computer that the electrical solution is going to be. So it's all to do with, you know, trying to reduce the heat output of your computer. So, you know, when we're talking about quantum computers and all the rest of it, we're talking about photonic computers that are driven by light circuits, and they will run cool. So we end up with a different model for our environment. But what is important is, where does electrical charge come from and where does magnetic charge come from, given that if my claims about Ampere hold up, that his assumption that a moving charge produces a magnetic field, if that assumption is invalid, what produces the magnetic charge? What produces the electric charge? What produces the temperature charge? Right, and this is where I get a bit confused, and I don't really have a good answer. But when we go back to our Chargino, and imagine an incredibly thin, incredibly long, incredibly wound up helical path flow, but there's no flow. This thing has no subcomponents. It's a single object in a multi-dimensional. If I go up into higher dimensions, it might actually loop back in on itself, and there's just one big rubber band, as it were. But this thing is flowing. It's actually moving. It's like a conveyor belt, and the rate at which it moves produces a resonance, a frequency resonance. And the electric charge is one set of resonance frequencies. The magnetic charge is another set of magnetic frequency resonance. So there's harmonics in this flow. So what's important to matter structure is a geometry, something that allows me to carry a charge, and resonance. Right? I keep running into the number 3. I keep running into prime numbers. And the resonance of the charge, if I change it from the electric resonance being dominant to the magnetic resonance being dominant, I will change this particle from looking like an electrical particle to looking like a magnetic particle. In other words, it will go from electron to magnetron, north or south, depending on, it'll go to a north particle. Yeah, the north particle will be the electron equivalent. The south particle will look like a proton. So you end up with these behaviors like temperature, electricity, magnetism, all express a similar repetition, the same sorts of rules. But you know, in the magnetic particle, you'll see a magnetic monopole and an electric dipole. Or maybe you'll see a temperature dipole with a very thin electric conduit coming out of it, a thin thread coming out of it.
That's why we see birkeland currents off of smoke, off of incense. Yes. You see unfurling pattern and space naturally harmonizing and building up a resistance between its layers.
Well, it builds up a charge interaction mechanism that tries to balance out.
It's charge separation, and dual layers.
Yeah, but it's also trying to balance them out and cancel them. But if it ever succeeds in cancelling it, it'll explode. And the reason why is cancelling means that the structure absorbs the Aether, and the Aether will make that structure more rigid, but it'll enhance the discontinuity element of it. So the continuity, the thing that's making the structure be stable, becomes overridden because of material in it, or the components in it, causes the instability to become amplified, and eventually the instability is stronger than the stability, and the thing falls apart. So when we talk about minimum energy, what we're really talking about is the minimum energy state to maintain a structure that is stable for long periods of time. So when we talk about grabbing an electron or a proton and zipping it along an accelerator, Paul Thornhill got it right. You know, the faster we push this thing, it's like trying to push a soap bubble. We need to make the soap bubble an iron ball to make it go faster. And the only way that it can occur is the soap bubble absorbs the Aether of the environment to the point where it is able to go at the speed we want it to go at. And because of the way these interactions are occurring, the electric fields of the matter around and the electric field of the matter itself and the magnetic fields of the matter around and the magnetic field, there's going to be an interaction. And eventually, this thing is going to be set to a maximum speed because of these interactions, but it's also going to cook because it's absorbing more and more material and becoming more and more unstable. So when they talk about a collision, are they talking about two particles actually hitting each other, or is it just that one particle got to the point where it could no longer maintain its structure and exploded? And we say, oh, that was a collision. What proof do we have that there was a collision?
Yeah, we don't.
We don't. So, you know, one of the things that I used to criticize I still do criticize him when he says it. He says, "Oh, but we have recorded everything." And I said, "Well, you can't have. Just don't say those words to me. Please don't say those words to me. You know I'm going to come after you." And I said, "If you don't know that there's some thing to record and you don't have a detector to record it, how the hell can you get away with telling me you've recorded everything when you don't know what's there to be recorded in the first place?" That's the first problem we have. How can we prove that we know what actually happened and that we got everything in the first place? If you go back and look at some of the old vintage films that have been cleaned up, where they have the howitzer firing the nuclear shell and it explodes, you see the big mushroom cloud occur, and after a while you see all these lightning streaks around the side on a toroidal surface. That was the first, concrete proof to me that nuclear reactions are actually electrical. They're not what the guys have been promoting. Hot fusion is just sort of explosion type, right? When I was talking about electrical conduction in a conductor or of any kind, we're talking about the Aether setting up a conduit field structure through which the discharge can occur. So it forms the circuit. Then we have light racing down the circuit, right? And we have electrons and protons involved. And what you have when a circuit switches on, and we'll just use it, say it's a wired circuit, a conductor like copper and other devices. What's occurring in that copper is that the light is causing neutrons to form as it passes through. So when it comes by the atoms, they're in an excited state, and an electron and the neutron form, and the light gets absorbed, and we get a neutron formed, and it's a transitory thing, and then it breaks up, and the light continues down. So what's occurring is the electrical transmission of the electron down the pipe of the wire is due to a cascade of neutron formation and dissociation along the entire wire length, and it happens at 99% the speed of light. Right? You need light to achieve that result. Why? An electron travels down a wire. It's called electron drift, and it travels a foot every 45 or 15 minutes, some hugely slow speed. Right? So what's occurring? Is the electron that's going on at the beginning actually the one traveling down the wire, or is there a cascade release of electrons that make it look like there's an electron train running down the wire?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the detectors to actually watch this stuff happen. So when I come back to Ampere, I say, rightio, we know that the electron is a monopole charge electrically, and we know it's a dipole charge magnetically. We know that because of the way this thing's moving, the magnetic fields will diminish because they're going in opposite directions, so they cancel. But the electric fields are monopole, and they will stay. They progress along the wire, which is why you watch some of those YouTube videos where they're talking about that long piece of wire and how fast you get an initial circuit switch on, and then over a period of time it builds up to the voltage level of the current of the wire. It takes a period of time to do it, and it's a fairly fast switch on. but the circuit switches on instantly across its entire length the minute you hit the switch. In fact, the switch is on before you even touch the switch because it's an intention. This occurs in DC circuits. If you go to switch on a DC circuit, you can actually get zapped before you switch the switch because it's like the circuit's anticipating being switched on. But if you change your intention, you don't get the reaction. Why does this occur? There's got to be something we do not understand with our interaction with the DC circuit. With the AC circuit, you've got an oscillation. It's like, a particle in the water. It's, vibrating back and forward, but there is a field progression down the wire. And it's a form of radiant electricity, but it's been confined inside the wire to transmit itself down the wire. But the energy loss in that process is huge because there's a nuclear reaction occurring the entire length of the line. And some of these transmission lines are talking about 30% power loss. And then we have, if I have a harmonically resonating magnetic field, if I have an oscillating magnetic field in a certain way, I will change the atomic arrangement of the atoms. So I will turn copper into some other metal, and the circuit will no longer work. That's nuclear fusion. We have nuclear fusion occurring in animals, where for humans, if you're living in a hot environment, you eat lots of salt because your body turns it into potassium, and that's an endothermic nuclear reaction, and it cools your body. You've got plants that you can grow. All you have to do is have carbon dioxide atmosphere and water and a bit of oxygen and glass, silicon dioxide, and the plant will grow. It will create the elements it needs to grow and create structure. So it will create phosphorus from the silicon. If I join two oxygens and two hydrogens together, I get silicon. Right? The nuclear synthesis model we have is not correct, and the SAM model shows why it's not correct, because it's a building block arrangement. It's like Lego bricks. You put the right Lego bricks together, and you get the atom that it requires. But some of these structures interfere with each other, which is why they're unstable. When I saw the SAM model, I thought, well, there's proof that my thinking was dead correct, because I thought atoms grew. And there it was. And when I saw
it's dynamic and it's a progressive growth. There's a progression, and the only way it can progress is progressive growth is.
So is
like,
there,
and what you point out,
is there a non-radioactive version of technetium or promethium or whatever? There's radioactive elements that we have. Is there a configuration that's non-radioactive? Probably. Where will we find antimatter? Well, we're looking at it. We're looking through it. We're made of antimatter. All the positive protein structure, all the positive charge structure in us is antimatter, anti-charge. So I was talking about there was three types of matter. There's matter which we call positive. There's matter that's charge reverse, which is actually mirror or anti-charge structure. And then there's proper antimatter. And when we talk antimatter, we're talking about the direction of motion, the direction of charge expression, the direction of construction is totally reversed to its normal, to what we would call matter. So when I get charge and anti-charge of exact same construct, so I get an electron and a muon and I join them together, and as long as they are exactly the same construct, I'll get a pile of photons out of it, because it'll dissociate into photons. Photons create these things and they go back to being photons when they meet. But when we're talking about a true, fully antimatter structure, an anti-structure meeting its exact structure component, which is identically constructed, when those two things meet, we don't get anything except Aether particles. The whole thing just falls apart. It turns back into the Aether. And under those circumstances, if you could watch the Aether, you would see a ripple. But the environment around us is very good at absorbing the Aether. And we've got proof that there is an Aether. There is now two experiments where they take their interferometer vertically through the atmosphere, and the higher they go, the more the interaction is. And the reason being is at the Earth's surface, there's lots of matter absorbing the Aether, but when I get up high, there's not so much matter, so it doesn't get absorbing the Aether too well. So you have more Aether. So as you go up in the up through the atmosphere, the matter density decreases, but the Aether matter density increases. But as I come down the atmosphere, the matter structure that's present increases in its density, and the Aether decreases in its intensity, which is why we've got these sorts of things going. The only thing I'm still debating about is gravity a residual cancellation charge effect, where all the charges have been cancelled to the point where we have a gross effect we call gravity. And I'm beginning to, while Thornhill was talking about it as the electric dipole of the atom, the electrons and the protons, their arrangement. But that's electrical charge, which is monopole, and it's harder to cancel that out. Whereas if we're talking magnetic dipole, it's way easier to do it. And magnetism, if it's the driving thing for gravity, it will be incredibly weak, far more effective at creating if it's a residual magnet, if gravity is a residual magnetic effect, it's much easier to achieve it because you've got a dipole structure to begin with. You've got two sets of charges that you can cancel out quicker. So, there's that sort of things. If I can get these two if I get two structures that are identical and I try to, and they're in counter rotation, I can slow them down, but I can't make them exactly the same rotation, because if I do that, it absorbs, the material will absorb more and more of the Aether to maintain its stability, because it doesn't want to go to zero charge. It can't achieve that. If it achieves it, we get an Antimatter explosion, where you get a proper void of charge that expands into spheric, and all the Aether material wraps itself around it, polarizes it around to compress that void and make it disappear. And in that process, we get what we call an explosion. It's a release of energy, and the environment is incredibly good at absorbing that pulse, which is one of the reasons why, a bomb is only so good for a certain area. And if you want to, let's say you want to blow up a meter radius, you've got to use a certain amount of explosive. But if you want to blow up a 2 meter radius, the volume of stuff, you've got to use, I forget what it is. It's a cube power. You got to use that thing raised to the power of 3 to get the same effect. So if you want to blow up a given volume, it's cheaper to use the same bomb multiple times in a star pattern of some kind and do the same result than it is to have a bigger and bigger bomb, which is why nuclear weapons and thermonukes were only good up to a certain size, and after that the easiest solution was to have lots of the same size. The Russians detonated a 150 megaton bomb, but the damage it does is nothing compared to 10 megabomb time. You get the same result. It's just you get a more even distribution of destruction. So it's the reason why we don't build those dirty great big bombs in the first place. But I call nuclear weapons a firecracker, because compared to what an electrical discharge from our ionosphere to the surface of the planet, it would make a nuclear bomb look like a firecracker. The amount of energy that's up there is huge. We're bloody lucky we haven't had the right sort of result to cause a complete avalanche discharge of the electrical charge in our ionosphere down onto the surface of the planet. And the last time it happened, they called them the thunderbolts of the Cods, for good reason. I think the Grand Canyon was carved out and deposited, and they now call it the Rocky Mountains. That's what I think happened. And it happened in a matter of hours or days. And my mate who I'm working with is really into minerals and geology and all the rest of it. And I said to him, all I need to make any given mineral is the environment created to need that mineral. Right? It might be under the ground at 100,000 feet down, or it might be 10 feet above my head in a big plasma conduit. It doesn't matter. All I need is the environmental conditions to create the mineral, and the mineral will be created. Nothing is going to stop that. The only question is this going to rain down on my head, or is it going to pop out of the ground underneath my feet? Both are possible. And what we have in science is the lack of imagination to understand that the easiest way to create diamond is to do vapor deposition. Space diamonds are stronger than the ground diamonds. And the first, if I've got ionized carbon and I put it in an environment and I've got a seed on which to form, the first structure it will go to is diamond. The very first geometry. It's not going to form the graphene or other structures. You get diamond up front. You might get Buckminster full of balls as well and other structures, but diamond's the first one because it's the easiest one. It's the least energy required one. So our understanding of how things work is infantile. And I've long claimed that I can create a pipe of any material for as long as you like. All I need is a rotating heating element to deposit a vapor on a ring and just move the head of the pipe along, and it'll just grow a pipe. You know, you see those stoneware jars in the Egyptian tools that they try to figure out how you can make the jar. Well, I can 3D paint it direct using heat. I don't have to drill out stone or anything. You've got glyphs on the walls of the pyramid that show things, devices that have to be electrical. And we want to claim we're the first people to discover electricity. How did Solomon light his temple without needing lamps that took oil? We've got the evidence, we just refuse to accept it. And we say the crystal balls, you look into the crystal ball, you can see far away places and hear things far away without being present by looking into this crystal ball. What's the difference between that story and what we're using right now? The computer, the internet, and the television. So that's where I'm sitting, guys, and we have a long way to go before we change our thinking. And my thinking, you know, I used to watch all the Cosmos shows and all that sort of quantum rubbish, and I've lost interest in it because it's no longer true. Like Wal Thornhill says, you know, these science documentaries are now so full of holes that I know are real that I just can't be bothered to watch it anymore because I know the science is wrong. But, you know, do I prove that there's an existence of God from science? Is that possible? I don't know. Maybe I have. But if there is a God, we are definitely component parts of him or it. And I think it's a she, not a he, because they create life. And they're a component part of us, but we're separate. And you talk about some of the guys in the past that were trying to work out this mystery. They didn't have the understanding of that time of the sort that I've got available to me to imagine it. Right? When there was a story of one of the saints walking along the ocean, he comes across a kid, and the kid's, you know, running. He's dug a hole in the sand. He's running over to the ocean, getting a bucket of water, dropping it into the hole, and running back to the ocean and getting another bucket. And the guy's watching him for a while. And he says, "What are you trying to do?" He says, "I'm going to put the ocean in the hole." He says, "You can't do that." And the kid comes back and says, "Nor can you work out the mystery you're trying to work out. It's beyond your capacity. If we don't have the right foundations, we're never going to figure it out." We've built lots of new toys, but our fundamental understanding of why this behavior occurs, why it must occur, why the mathematics, yes, it's a good descriptor, but it's not the driver. The universe doesn't go to university to understand mathematical theory or to apply its rules. It just does them. So we learn mathematics because of the universe. And our mathematics is not always right because our understanding of how things occur is not correct, which is why we get it wrong. So Dorian sets and eversion, you know, and lie mathematics and all the rest of it, a lot of that is just, you know, it might as well be talking to me in ancient Hindu or Sanskrit or whatever. You know, it's beyond my capacity because I haven't spent the 18 years trying to study it. So I'm an eclectic. I watch as much of it as I can and try and put it all together in a sensible way. And maybe I've succeeded. But for sure as eggs, given that I'm a finite being, I'll have stuffed it up somewhere. Somewhere in the stuff that I've been talking about throughout this video is wrong. It has to be wrong. Because I'm a finite being. I can't understand all the things that are. I lack the imagination. I lack the ability in mathematics to describe this thing correctly so that it works in the manner we observe it to occur. And while we can demonstrate the process, we've got to explain why it is that process that happens. Chemical reactions are actually nuclear reactions. When I get oxygen and combine it with my two hydrogen atoms, what occurs is I form a neutron bond. I get nuclear fusion going on in the process, and the hydrogen and the oxygen produce a neutron, and when that neutron disassociates, I get an electromagnetic bond. That's what happens in chemistry. Chemistry is a nuclear reaction. Biology is a nuclear reaction. Everything we understand is a nuclear reaction if we want to talk about it in those terms. And it's all driven by the interchange of electromagnetic potentials, discharges, and balancing. And if I can balance the charges really well, I will shrink the construct. If I separate those charges and exaggerate it, I will expand the construct. And when I do that, the field structures expand and contract. But if I could shrink, if I could go and get some vehicle like, say, the mythical ones like the TRB-3 or the Verminars, and if I can shrink them down to the size of a photon, they can travel at whatever speed they like. Because they're not going to interact with the environment, which is going to make them stick. They just slide past it. So you can go as fast as you want. You can travel instantly from any location to another location in the universe. You know, how fast, how quick can I go? Count to 5. 1, you're leaving the Earth. 5, you're at Pluto. That's the sort of speeds that we're talking about. And if you're the country with that technology and your guys against you haven't got it, they haven't got a hope in hell of winning. I just hope that if that technology exists, it's used to the benefit of all of us and not to our destruction. But anyway, I'm pretty well done unless people got questions for me. Everybody's gone very quiet. You there? I know Andy's there. I know Buddy's there. Hello.
Oh, sorry, I had it.
Yeah, I'm still there.
I was saying stuff, but I had it muted. Sorry.
So what do you think? Have I left planet Earth and turned into something strange, or is it, does it hang together and make sense?
Makes perfect sense to me.
I'm going to have to listen to that again, Rob.
Anyway, I posted the links to the Google Docs, which is good. So if you want to read that, that's okay. Yep. But chapter 4 is when Ramon joined them all into one book, he didn't realize what was going on. So the fission sun document was only there because I mentioned it in my nature of things, and most of it is wrong. Okay, it was the gravity accretion model, but electrified, and it's still assumed that you still had black holes and supernovas and all that sort of stuff, and the Big Bang, which is why probably the guy who tried to claim it as his own theory went racing with it, because it gave him the solution to things. But the consequence of all this sort of stuff is, I say, there's no interaction that we're aware of that is not fundamentally electromagnetic. Weather systems.
Well, on that, Rob, here's a question. Are we, so with the gravity, am I held on Earth, or is it pushing me down? Do you understand the question I'm getting at?
Well,
where I am now because I'm I'm drawn to it, or is it because of the forces above me holding me to it?
Both.
You know, both.
Both.
Yes. Yes.
The universe is pushing you to the surface, and the surface is
Pushing and pulling.
pulling. And the surface pushing you away as well as pushing you towards it, and the universe is doing the same thing. The reason why you're stuck to the surface of the Earth and can't go anywhere is you can't change your electromagnetic potential balance so that the Earth repels you and the universe attracts you stronger. If you could do that, you could fly. And I reckon birds and insects are able to do what they do because they've got some biological mechanism that changes the charge distribution in their bodies such that the Earth repels. And it's a bit like Victor Schwarberger when he was describing trout in the streams.
Yes.
The cold water rushing past is keeping the trout in position.
Yes.
It's only when the water heats up that the trout's got to move the muscles. So it's being pushed forward.
You change the balance. You change the balance of the structure.
Yeah, and trout can go through air, through an air vortex caused by a water flow, and those vortices, those heights that they can jump are 15 meters. No water, right? And no biology guy I know has ever been able to explain why that happens. Victor Schwarberger gave an explanation. It's probably closer to the truth, but the academics in Austria at the time hated him because he was getting paid more than they were and doing the job that they were supposed to be able to do and a better job at that. And they got really pissed off with him, jealous of him. It's this case. We see that today in modern science.
Well, he wasn't classified as an expert because he wasn't in the university club at the time.
No, and when he had his face-to-face meeting with Hitler, he said, all your scientists are morons. They shouldn't even be employed as scientists. Put them in the army. They don't know what they're talking about. And small wonder he only ever had one meeting with bloody Hitler because the scientists that didn't want to go shoot at the Russians or whatever made sure he never got near Hitler ever again. But he was doing stuff that was radical at the time. You know, you got
it's still radical today.
Yeah, and it's all been suppressed because I think it's been, when.
Well, I think a lot of it's been suppressed because the powers that be, whether it be in academia or whatever, can't get their head around it.
Well, that will be one part of it in the academic world, but the second reason why it's suppressed is it allows you to build devices that are advantageous in the military field. If you can get a submarine to pass through the water at 300 miles an hour and not make any evidence that have ever been there, or you can get an aircraft to zap through the atmosphere at 4,000 miles an hour and not make any sound, you have to your advantage the ability to smack someone around before they realise you're even there, let alone where did you go. I think one of the reasons why the SALT II nuclear arrangement occurred is I think the Russians found out that the Americans didn't need 30 minutes to wipe out Russia. They just needed 5 minutes because they could drop the bomb from orbit or close to orbit and it'd be on the ground 5 minutes later. How do you first strike against that? How do you respond against it?
How do you respond? Well, that's the biggest problem. I think it's going on at the moment with America's thinking too.
Yeah. So if that technology,
everybody's now got that stuff.
If that technology is there in the planet at the moment, it's a problem if any one side is able to compete exactly with the other. If both sides have the chance of doing this to each other, and they're able to gain advantage from it, then the dangers of a war that destroys us is much enhanced. But if both sides understand completely that the other side can still snot them regardless of what they do, then you get mad and, the world seems to be stable. Mutually assured destruction has certainly stopped, stupidity in 63 and 78 and other times in our past. But we've still got these devices that can cause havoc and they need to be got rid of. But I don't think that only weapons out there that can destroy continents.
Yes.
The sort of stuff we've been talking about, if the universe can do it, if If a birkeland current can produce an entire solar system complete in an instant, then what chance has the Earth got if it runs into something like that? It wouldn't matter how good your weapons were.
That's right.
You know, it's a film that I regret ever having watched because I think it's a total waste of time. It's called Don't Look Up. It's Netflix and released in the last year. But if that scenario was to occur, an asteroid was to occur, and the competing interests in mining it versus getting rid of it was to happen, I think that's exactly what had happened. The only thing that would not occur is that the escape ship would never make it. Because it takes off when the collision's in progress. But why would you spend 23,000 years in hibernation traveling with a 51% chance of dying, rather than just orbit in the solar system and find somewhere else to land and wait for everything to settle down again?
Well, what I got from that show was that ultimately greed will win. And ultimately, the greed will destroy. Because that was what the mining was about, was that it was going to give me an advantage over everybody else because I was able to get all the so-called minerals very easily. And so that was the greed factor. And then at the end of it, the greed factor won, but then the natural universe destroyed the greed factor and everything with it.
Yes.
And yes, it wouldn't matter if you were in a ship running away. You finished anyway. Yes.
But the real issue there was the hubris element, which the really rich guy who wanted everybody to control everybody's life was relying on the people that are giving him his control, didn't build enough robots to make sure that the asteroid get destroyed in the first place, so to fragment properly.
Yep.
We only need 25,000 when we actually should use 60,000 to make sure the job's done. And what's the price?
And that's part of the greed factor. That's part of the greed factor again.
Yeah.
It's the bit that destroys.
I like the end of the film though, where the president got eaten by the dinosaur. I thought that was brilliant justice. But the thing that made me really disappointed was the morons survived. They're the ones that, it's a bit like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Earth is populated with humans, the outcasts of the waste of the populace that they didn't want, the 1/3 that they didn't need.
Yes.
So maybe survival requires, you have to be an incompetent. But anyway. So the consequences of my speculation for me personally is that I don't believe that anything that the universe produces in terms of an existence, I don't think that existence can be destroyed. It can be transformed, but it can't be eliminated. So we are etheric beings or living in a dimensionality that's beyond what we experience most of the time, and we will return to it. The other thing I believe is that the universe is a nested Russian doll where the dimensionalities of the spatial arrangements are prime numbered. So the universe is an infinite nest of prime numbered spaces. So we would say, the base universe would be universe 0. It's making 0 a prime number, even though the mathematicians won't like that. Then the next prime number is 1, then 2, which is the only even prime number. And then the next spatial structure is 3, and then the next spatial dimension is 5, and then 7, 11, 13, 17, and so on, 19, 23, and so on.
So, Rob, have you ever watched the Ganymede hypothesis, part 1 and 2, that Troy McLaughlin and Ted Holden did a few years ago?
No.
Because what you're talking about there is basically what what they were talking about.
I'm not aware of it. And the thing is, a lot of the stuff I'm saying, there'll be other people out there who will have heard the exact same statements from different places, and I'm not in contact with those people. I haven't realised that they're even there. You know, I didn't start looking until 2017.
They did this about 5 years ago. They put this video up, and if you have a look on YouTube at Ganymede hypothesis,
okay, I'll go and have a look at it. But the thing that
you'll find that it's about 5 years ago they put it up there, and it's actually fairly well done video.
What it tells me is the stuff that Buddy is doing agrees with the speculation I've got. The stuff that David Allen LaPointe is doing agrees with my speculation. There are today I was at the chiropractor talking about the difference in electric and charges, and on the chiropractor, he's Latham, he's found. He said he had the exact same conversation with another guy in Albany. Now, what that tells me is that the universe is trying to get us dumb humans to see the real truth.
Yep.
And as a consequence, whether we call it ET or the universe or extraterrestrials or whatever we want to name this agency as, it's trying to get the human race back on track because it's important to the universe. And the people here that don't want to obey those rules are going to be eliminated. You know, you either do things that are right to nature, or you don't. You know, you're going to
eventually you disappear.
You will die. So
you'll get rubbed out.
The New World Order is not what the universe wants. You know, the COVID-19 stuff. You know, it's sad and all the rest of it, but dictatorial control of the planet is not what the universe does. The life system is not a dictatorship. It's personal responsibility, risk-taking, and, you know, the possibility of dying. We don't see the natural order obeying one particular point of view and method of doing things. It just does not happen, which is why dictatorial control has always failed and will fail. And these people that are trying to get total control of our lives are going to fail. And in the process, they're going to be killed, because the price of doing this against the nature of the universe is death. You know, we could talk about, you know, the theory of gravity being, you know, just a theory of speculation. That's all well and good. But I know for a fact that my body, and nobody else I know has a body, that if you walk off the edge of a cliff into the 100-meter space below and you go down because electrical and magnetic attraction occurs, you will hit the below there, and your body's not designed to suffer the change from maximum velocity to zero in an instant. You'll die, or you'll be severely injured, and your life will be never the same again. So, you know, we can argue about whether it's real or not, but the simple fact is I'm going to rely on the fact that other people have not had a good outcome, and I'm not going to put myself in that circumstance. You know,
I'm not going to try to test it.
Yeah. So this is what we forget, you know, and a lot of science, you know, it's like they talk about this sort of stuff and they say, oh, we always knew it. Well, they're deluding themselves. If they always knew it and had thought about it properly in the first place instead of a knee-jerk reaction, they would have admitted the truth to themselves at least. Because while we can delude other people, we can never ever delude ourselves. So, yeah. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I wish you all the luck with your conference, buddy. I hope it comes together.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's coming together good so far. Looking forward to having you present.
You want me to present like I did now?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I don't know how to do that without graphics.
No, we'll help you. We'll get you a 15, 20-minute talk down. You got to condense your material to about 15, 20 minutes, 25 max.
I reckon you just say, stick it up there on the thing and say, you know, if you wanted to really give a guy a hopeful day, prove him wrong and listen to all that he said. You know, I invite anybody out there to prove that I'm wrong about Ampere's assumption. I'd like anybody out there to prove me that I'm wrong about the Millikan oil drop experiment, because that would mean I'm wrong in my speculation. But if I'm right, that means that our understanding of how things behave needs to change. And as a consequence, the mathematics we use to describe that needs to take on the new model. And unlike being accused of chucking the baby out with the bathwater, I'm not saying that at all. The observed facts never change. They are what is. It's how we understand those things to work that needs to be got right. And in the process, the right mathematics will come out. And I've always said in the process of coming to this, whatever the mathematics is for electromagnetic behavior or charge interactions, it is simple mathematics. A person in grade 6 with a basic algebra understanding should be able to do the mathematics. There might need to be a computer because of all the calculations required, but the maths is simple. It requires trigonometry, geometric shapes, frequencies, and motion behavior, and a correct understanding of dimensionality, and a correct understanding of what a charge actually is. Are the laws of opposites or the laws of polarity or whatever other term you want to give it, is that the correct understanding? You know, do we need to understand things correctly? And I think what we call the elements from the ancient past are the states of matter, which are solid, liquid, gas, plasma, and aether. You can call them whatever you want in those terms. The other cultures have different names, but there are the states of matter, and the states of matter are not the same thing as the atoms of matter and the particles or the constructions. And I've even in the group that we're talking to now, I've had people tell me that you can have a wave without a material, and I'm saying, well, that's not wave theory. I don't know what it is, but it's not wave theory. You need a material to propagate a wave, and I know that there's no way of turning a wave motion into a laser or conduit flow. I don't know how you can do that. And I don't know of any mathematics that's out there. Maybe somebody's got too much time and invention to produce a pseudo maths that makes it look like that's what's going on. If they can, and well, good luck to them. But if they can prove it, then my theory needs to change. My understanding needs to change. But it might be a while down the track because it's taken me most of my life. I'm in my early 60s. I've only been working at it for 7 years. But you look at what Ampere did in 7 years. He set up the fundamentals for everything. And all because Oersted discovered, a curious phenomenon between electricity and magnetism. Came up with a model, and I think it's fundamentally flawed. Weber, I think, is Weber's mathematics. If we go back and look at him properly and do a correct understanding, we'll get Newtonian equations of motion for free. And not only will they express magnetic behavior and electrical behavior, it'll be a much more complete model. And the helical eversion, which creates an egg, is a better description of orbits of the planetary systems than the helical model of ellipses. I say to my mate, I've got two ways of getting from A to B. I can do all this complex mathematics, which might be right or wrong, and maybe make it, or I can put a scope that looks at the object I want to pose with the crosshairs and make sure the thing stays in the center of the crosshairs and I can get there. I don't need a computer to figure out where I'm going. I just need to be able to mechanism to keep the thing where I want to go to in the crosshairs, and I'll get there. So there's two approaches, and there's always more than one approach. Whatever way we think we can do things, there's at least three. But the observation I make is that every time I've looked at this stuff and really thought it through, I cannot avoid hitting prime numbers, which is why I expanded the prime number definition the way I did, so that the integer number set has prime numbers that are positive and negative, as well as 0 and 1 and -1. And in the real number set, anything that's a transcendental unending number that can't be factored into another unending number is a prime. So the value of pi, the value of phi, the prime root of a prime number are all prime numbers. You've got the inverse of a prime is prime, except if that number is 0, 1, 2, or 5, or -2, -5, or -1. The number 0 only exists in the whole number set, the integer number set. You don't have a -0. The real number set does not contain the number 0 at all. It's not a feature. You can't have -0 and +0.0. So it's invalid. Any mathematical operation involving 0 has got to be questioned with a view to saying it's an illegal operation, unless it's locating a place between the number and its negative on a line or in the geometry terms. I loved Distincti's treatment of explaining what the square root of -1 was using the set, the matrices, Vortex stuff. There's a lot of mathematics I want to learn. I'm going to admit quite freely that I can't do the mathematics required by my model because I just don't have the skill. It's up. I've said in the speculation so far that this is a collegiate effort. It's going to take different people with different skills to come up with a better picture. And all I've done at the moment is try and connect the dots. But someone's going to come along with the maths. Someone's going to come along with a consistent treatment of geometries and motion and all the rest of it. So I've just set the groundwork, and I'm just waiting for people to come along and say, well, I want you to add this chapter too, and here it is, and publish it. But the fundamentals are that I've described certain experiments and why they're flawed. I've given them to university professors and people who I have respect to understanding electromagnetic speculation and understandings, asking them, where have I gone wrong? Would you please tell me where I've gone wrong? And one guy, Evil Cat, he's 95 years old. I don't know whether he's still with us, but he sent my speculation to about 6 different people in UK universities saying, here you go, here's a speculation, prove he's wrong. And not a single one of them has responded to any of this. Just beyond it's like what was it, the guy who's talked about Hart and Arp's article. He says, I cannot imagine this being correct, therefore it's wrong. Well, that doesn't mean that Hart and Arp got it wrong. It just means he didn't understand it. There's no reason to reject the publication.
Yeah.
It's like
cool.
listening.
Well, you guys want to call it a wrap?
Yeah. Yeah, that's all good. Unless you've got other things you want to comment on. But yeah, I'm more than happy for feedback. But I'm probably going to have to be toned down in my speculation processes. But the reason why you agreed with this, it sort of resonated with you, buddy, was because of the maths you've done. You've seen it. You've done it in artwork. It agrees with your understanding. And the thing that amazes me is how many people around the planet have come to the same conclusions independent of each other.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of people right now getting into the electric universe. I'm surprised. I know a lot of them, and I'm like, oh man, the word's actually getting out,
Yeah. Well, it's a complete different paradigm to the stuff. And it looks like it fits the reality we experience.
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense. It's intuitive.
Well, if we know that everything's made up of electrons and protons and photons, then we've got a speculation that relies on those and explains why they work the way they do. We don't need the rest of the made-up rubbish. We have not found a gravity wave. I don't know what it is they found, but it ain't a gravity wave. And we haven't found well, gravity is not electromagnetic, so how the hell do you get to detect a gravity wave with electromagnetics in the first place?
Yeah.
And if the gravity was a gravity wave and all the rest of it, where's the gravity particle? Where's the graviton? The positive and negative graviton. Where's that? We haven't found one. Now we've got a conjecture about a thing called a black hole and a white hole. Well, at least they got the two of them. But you know, the mathematics that describes it is wrong. The dimensional geography of the structures are incomplete and wrong. Time is being treated as a dimension when it can't be, because you know, time occurs as a counting of cycles as well as a charge as well as a flow, and you know, whatever it is, it ain't a dimension. There's so much problems with what's occurring, and one of the things that really annoys me in the civil science environment is the refusal to accept and test the evidence. And the worst example of it is Egyptology and archaeology and paleontology. And geology falls very quickly in behind it. History is also in that mix. It's just most of it made up rubbish. They haven't even accepted the data, you know. And they're refusing to accept the data. You know, God himself could turn up to a conference of these guys and tell them how it worked, and they'd chuck him out because they'd reckon he's a liar. And, you know, who's the dummy in that circumstance? Certainly God, I would say, because he thought he could go and talk to these people and make them listen, but they won't want to listen. They desire to believe their pet view about how things should work. And they get all pissed off and bent out of shape when the universe doesn't work the way they want it to, which is why they want their magic wand and their bullet and all the rest of it. And they're never going to get it. They're just going to look like a bunch of nonce, you know, has-beens. Shouldn't even be listened to or recognised by science of the future. So, you know, people like Arthur Eddington need to be taken out of it. You know, they don't need to be recognised. They've had their reward for stealing. Yeah.
I can agree on that. That's for sure.
And because they've, you know, stolen the work of others, they shouldn't be even recognised. You know, the guy who should have got the Nobel Prize for the Millikan experiment was the black African lab assistant who was working on his PhD. Millikan just was grandstanding for fame and publicity. The same with Eddington. Same with a lot of them. You know, Hilbert, I'm sure, recognised the error in his mathematics, and when he tried to change it, I reckon the entire science community that wanted his mathematics to be true told him that if he didn't keep the story that he'd already written, they'd blackball him. I'm sure they did that.
Yeah, because Hilbert space, it's all made up of Hilbert space.
Yeah. But, you know, Einstein was plagiarizing, well, plagiarizing the wrong way, but they were certainly relying on Riemann spaces. Now we're using the work of others without Pontclair and others, they're using their ideas without proper attribution.
Well, that's what scientists should do. They worked off of other scientists' work. So, I mean, he had to use it to get there to where he got.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind if someone uses my speculation to advance science, and if they attribute me, that'd be nice. But I'm not the only one that's making these discoveries and coming to these conclusions. You know, there's a whole bunch of us at the same time that are coming to the exact same conclusions. And the reason why I know that is I've gone out there and I've looked around and I trip over it everywhere. So I'll need to go and look up that Ganymede thing and have a watch. You know, I'd love to have your understanding of those mathematical sets. But, you know, there's a limit to how much I can spend time on trying to understand. And one of the things that I find my speculation is easier done when my brain's in neutral. So what I do is I spend a lot of time playing specific games like Minecraft. And I put my brain in neutral while I play the game, or go and have a sleep, and it suddenly comes to me, wide awake. Or someone asks me a question, I give an explanation, which is, the exact solution, the correct one. And I haven't thought about it before, and I'm wondering, where the hell did that all come from? Am I directly, absorbing information from the Akashic record?
Problem with that is Rob remembering it.
Well, yeah, but
you have them things coming, and then you got to be in a position where you either got to remember it or write it down.
Well, writing it down is what I try to do, but
yes.
I certainly believe our consciousness exists in the aethic structure, and where it's like it's a much more rich environment than Avatar that we're participating in.
Yep.
It's like, we exist in two structures basically, and the structure we're doing the learning in is the one where we don't have unlimited God power. We can't just create a world to our liking instantly. That's not that sort of facility is not available to us, so we're limited. And in under those circumstances, we get to understand the nitty-gritty, and I think that's true. So there's some elements in the science which I agree with, that the universe is learning through the existences like ourselves.
Well, that's what everything's kind of coming to a head with everyone thinking that AI, the purpose of humanity is to create AI, which is just the step.
No.
I don't know. I mean,
the only time we're going to get AI working properly is when we understand nature enough to duplicate it.
Well, okay, AI already knows you and I more than we know ourselves about all sorts of stuff. That's what direct advertisement is.
But that's not AI. AI.
Right. So I'm saying it already knows that. So all it has to do is study all the patterns in nature, which I'm sure it might be able to do in a split instant or maybe a day, and then start seeing algorithms of the larger cosmology of what we're talking about. It wouldn't even care about religion or any other scientism. AI would directly start building itself based off of self-assimilating systems.
Yeah, well,
like a universe.
I'll accept that AI is real when we've got a biological reproducing AI. It doesn't have to be biological in the sense of our sort of life, but it's got to be self-replicating.
Well, okay. What about xenobots?
Well, the thing is that a lot of this stuff is still linear programming. It's not exactly pattern matching. Yes, we've got what looks like AI, but I think it's pseudo AI. If we want to look at it, where do we have to look to find AI? Just look at any animal on the planet and you've got AI. In fact, if you look at any living thing on the planet, you've got AI straight away. So, I suspect that we're learning our structure from trying to duplicate it. And we're not doing a very good job at doing that because we haven't actually understood the structure. We haven't examined it sufficiently well to make it happen. Like the eyeball, for example, before the brain gets the messages about what you're looking at, you're getting the complete spatial arrangement of the environment. And so long as you navigate that environment within 13 seconds, you will not collide with anything in it. Your AI system for negotiation of an environment under those circumstances is a biological response to self-survival. Insects don't have the time to try and figure out what's trying to kill them. It just knows that it needs to move, so it moves. It's an automatic response. And I think until we understand why those things behave the way they do, we haven't got anywhere near close to AI. for the example, how is it that a parrot in a budgerigar is the size of your hand? How is it able to talk human languages? How many neurons does it actually take to be able to speak? And does that impose understanding? Does the bird understand what it's saying? Or is it just repeating everything it's heard? And then there's the same cognitive experiments that were done with gorillas and chimpanzees. And it was clear that the individuals involved in those experiments were capable of thinking. You can argue about what age level they were in comparison to a human, but they're certainly able to think. A dog's the same. A dog is of equivalent intelligence of a 4-year-old child. You're looking at dolphins. Are dolphins more intelligent than human beings? I'm beginning to wonder that themselves. And then the other day I was talking to my kids, and I said, if we had a lunar colony or a colony on Mars, the humans that lived on the moon would, where the gravity is what, 1/16, is it?
Something like that.
Yeah. Well, that means that the humans who born and grew up on the moon would be the inverse of 16th of our size. They'd be 16 times bigger than us. Why? The forces required to control the body growth are no longer present. They would be huge creatures. Their volume of their body would be way bigger. Their brain cavity would be way bigger. The number of cells in their head, in their brain, would be way bigger, assuming the cell size is the same. How much more intelligence would that being have compared to us, dummies here down here in a 1G environment versus a 1/16th G environment? Or would the cells be 16 times larger and therefore, no real difference? I don't have answers to those questions. The nice question to ask for the biologists, particularly the ones that worked out, with the muscle mass ratio of how big a creature can be. The elephant, whale, the big whale are the only two animals of that size in our gravity environment. One's supported in water and one's on land.
Everything you're saying has been put together in a collective book called Scale by Jeffrey West. He came up and worked with hundreds of thousands of people, I think, because the data was so large, to try to figure out the metabolic scaling rate of mammals, and he shows that there's a 3/4 scaling law and a half quarter scaling law, or half scaling law.
Well, unfortunately,
that goes through all creatures and cities and companies. All cities and companies, the growth of the city, the growth of the company, the sustainability of the city, the growth of an animal. He shows that it's all the same 3/4 scaling law, logarithmic growth. It's a great book.
Yeah, and does it mention the Utopia experiment?
I haven't come across that yet.
Right. Utopia 1 and 2 experiments were done at the University of Berkeley, California, I think. But what they did was create an environment that was perfect for mice, and they let it go. And at the beginning, it was really good for the mice, and then after the end of it, they'd become completely psychotic, moronic, self-destructive animals. They're just self-destruction. They ended up, the colonies wiped themselves out, basically. And that was applied when they did those experiments. People went, ooh, what happens if the human race is basically a mice colony? What's going to happen to us? Which is one of the reasons why this global population limit is being pushed. There are reasons behind the New World Order. It's all about making sure the elite power structure maintains its dominance and control in an environment that's self-sustaining. But the trouble is their methods of achieving it are not going to work.
I don't know. They've always had the control. Seems to me like they're going to do anything to keep the control. But we know who wins in the end.
Yeah, I know. It's one of the reasons why I think time travel is a reality. I mean, I'm sure that people have been to the past from the present and to the future from the present and from the future to the past and all the rest of it. And it's you know, the future causes the past and the past causes the future. It's a bidirectional flow. And the reason why I claim that is because time itself behaves as a charge. The closest we are to the charge potential of the future, the quicker we race towards it. The further away from it, the closer to the past we are, the slower we progress. So,
I like to say that the past and the present oscillate around, or the past and the future oscillate around the present moment.
Well, I think there was a story in Doctor Who, the Angels story, where Dave Tenorman, who's the Doctor at the time, describes time as a big ball of timey-wimey-goomy stuff, where it's a spaghetti ball that interconnects. So there are nodes that occur in history that must occur. The paths to those nodes can be multiple, and they don't always have to be traveling forward direction of time. They can go in any direction. And I suspect that what we've got is a universal structure where everything that can happen does happen. And we can call it alternate reality, or there's lots of stories out there on the internet of people that have come from countries that don't exist and disappeared over time, or the DC-3 aircraft that was on a flight to Venezuela and turned up 37 years later, and they panicked and ran away, never to be seen again. There's an aircraft coming into Miami, Florida, and it says, we'll be landing in 10 minutes, it's blah, blah, and they arrived 30 minutes later as they were all organising. They went inside and watched the clock on the cockpit, and it said it arrived 10 minutes later. And there was a time discrepancy between what happened at Miami airport and the plane. The time frames were out of sync, and they came into sync when the plane landed. So, I've heard all sorts of stories, and there's claims that the Civil War was engineered to fail so that the North won instead of the South, so that America could, deal with the totalitarian Nazi thing that would have otherwise destroyed the United States. And I suspect that what we're suffering as a species right now is some sort of time war. The forces of light versus the forces of dark. And you can argue about who's the right side, but if there's two sides fighting a battle, and it's history related, where they can go back and change events and all the rest of it, that would be an incredible difficult war to fight for either side.
Well, if you control both sides, then you're winning.
Yeah. Well, I think
you create utopia and you destroy yourself.
Yeah. I don't think you can have a utopia, and I don't think you can have a dystopia. They're just the opposites of each other, and they're extremes.
Yeah,
and I don't think they're achievable. What you're aiming for is a circumstance of balance, and that's what the universe expresses to us. We don't know what the actual, if we're talking about a reference charge of electricity, voltage level, we don't know what the Earth's voltage level is in relation to the absolute voltage level. But what we know is that the Earth's voltage level of 0 changes to a different voltage level for every meter we go up into the atmosphere. The voltage potential increases, which is why if we have a wire that runs down 10 feet or 30 feet, we can generate electricity off it just because of the atmospheric voltage potential. We don't need to go and build ourselves a coal-fired power station to achieve a degree of electrical independence.
Well, herein leads another thing to Buddy's question that he asked before about what is the purpose, basically, of us. And it could be one of our purposes is to create, find, or tap into those universal type energy systems. And not good. But at the moment, we're struggling because we're still hanging on these Oh, well, they're not really old when you look in history, but they're older paradigms, you know, and we can't move forward. We can't move forward because of the systems we've created, and what you said before, Rob, because of the power structures.
But I think our purpose in the universe is more basic. Our purpose in the universe is to experience all that can be experienced, from the really good to the really bad. That's our purpose.
Yeah. And in a lot of those points, the really good and the really bad is defined to or by the individual. So what you might consider bad, someone else may not.
Yes.
If you get what I mean by that.
You end up with, you know,
it comes back to the power struggle.
Good or bad is a point of view, which is not a really good philosophy, but that's what Star Wars was on about. But what I suspect is happening is, if our existence is properly fractal, in other words, our existence occurs in multiple history lines simultaneously, there'll be history lines of our personal experience individually that run from the extremes of really great to really horrible. And at some point, it all comes back to one being. We condense into a single experience where we have it all at our fingertips. And that's what I suspect is really going on. That's the proper experience. Because it's the one that enables the universe to achieve its ultimate need of experience. Now, how can you determine good versus evil if you never experience one or the other? You need both to be able to come to a view, and you never realize what balance is unless you've been to the extremes.
Well, you can know it. You can vicariously know all of these things.
Yeah,
but to have the wisdom, you can't really know unless you go through it.
Yeah, no, it's like how, you know, we talk about pain, for example. Now, I've suffered a thing called peritonitis. It's where the intestines twist on themselves, and you got 24 hours to get that fixed or you're dead. And I said, I think that experience, that particular pain experience, makes childbirth look like, you know, a walk in the park. But I'm not female, so I've got no idea what, you know, giving birth to a child's like, and no male on the planet.
It could be the equivalent.
No male on the planet could imagine it because they've never been through it. They've just got no idea. But I ran into a female nurse, and she'd suffered the exact same problem, and she said, "You're right. You're dead right. Peritonitis is way, way worse." And I went, okay. But, you know, how does a male understand what it is like to be a female? The only answer to that question is they become a female. And maybe that's the reason why we get to go again. You know, in our past existences, have we been male and female? Do we, you know, swap between the two in different environments for different learning exercises? I really think the life that we experience is an exercise in learning. We're literally, the whole time we're here, we're learning. And it might not be stuff we want to learn, but we're learning it regardless. And the universe it doesn't care.
That's like that Alanis Morissette song. You live, you learn, you love. You know.
Yeah. So but we got evidence that you know, past people have lived past lives that they couldn't otherwise know unless they'd been there personally. You know, a 6-year-old describing what it was like to get shot up as a fighter pilot in World War II.
See, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that just because they know this information doesn't mean that they were that person. Doesn't mean that they lived that life, and doesn't mean that they were even related to that person. What I believe is that there's fossilized neural networks that everything is building constantly. If we're part of the filamentary
resonate with it.
Yeah, if we're part of the filamentary and the nodal universe, which everything is filamentary and nodal, the nodal would be the atomic structure, the filament would be energy and everything powering it.
Well, I'd say the nodal structure is the aethic field structure. But anyway, if we're in resonance with someone's...
Probably that too. I mean, there's the Oort cloud. The Oort cloud itself is an outer containment of the solar system. And that would be probably number one in your prime set. The Oort cloud would be a number one or a number three.
Maybe. If you look at the fission star document, you'll see the concept of ovoid shells that are curved due to nuclear radiation of neutrons and how far they travel before they disassociate. So the Oort cloud would be spherical under those circumstances out at the distance it is. But the Oort cloud is incredibly big. You know, we're talking, I think it's about 200 AU wide or thick.
Yeah, and it's like 300 and 800.
And it's got a great big toroidal tunnel in one section of it, you know, like a tube running off it.
Which is the Hall cloud.
Yeah. So there's, you know, how you come up with these structures is I just think it's the way it is. But, you know, the Oort cloud is not the heliopause. It's, you know, the Oort cloud is within, so it's like a bubble plasma structure inside. So, yeah, it's like one of the things that, you know, the reason why everybody, the astronomic group, think that the universe is only 13.7 billion light years big, when other speculation shows that it has to be at least 97 billion light years big, is because we're looking out into space in the same way as we look in the daytime out into the atmosphere. The bubble we're looking through is a rarefied plasma structure, and the light that we're seeing is diffracted, reflected, absorbed, and re-emitted. And the atmosphere of the universe in the plasma structure is such that we can only see 13.7 billion light years, because it's like looking up in the daylight and you just see a blue sky. But if you go down a mine shaft, you go down 1,000-meter mine shaft and look up, you see the stars. You don't see a blue sky. In the daytime, you'll see the stars. So, you know, it's overloaded. Our senses are overloaded with the scattered light, and you're not
still seeing my screen, are you?
Hey?
Are you still seeing my screen?
I'm just seeing bubbles of you and I'm not seeing anybody's screen though.
Oh, all right. Here, let me share my screen and show you. Or you can also look in the chat. But this is what I'm talking about here. I got to go back to the group in order to share my screen. Share screen. Start now. All right. Okay, now it's back. Oh, I accidentally hit stop sharing. Share screen. All right. Now this is what I was talking about. I don't know if it has the ability to rotate it or not, but you can kind of copy.
Yeah, I understand it.
You can kind of copy that. Yeah, but I just let me explain it a little bit to the viewers. The reason why we found the Oort cloud, or even hypothesized that the Oort cloud existed, is because of the Hall cloud, because of long distance comets, I forget the name of them, long life comets, something along those lines. Long period comets. They come in really close to the sun. Now, if the center of this birkeland current, the center of this filament, if you could focus on the circle with all the extra black lines on it, right in front, directly in front, that is an example of the Oort cloud, and it shows these extraneous, extra long periodic comets come in and graze by the sun and by the Hall cloud. Now, the Hall cloud could be represented by any one of these toruses, but it would most likely be, actually, I don't know which torus the Hall cloud would be represented by, but this is what I'm talking about. This literally shows the whole dynamics. Everything inside of it is the dynamics of our solar system. Like I was showing earlier, with Don Scott and David Johnson, Argos Vu video. This structure is real, and it's like it's toroid within toroid within toroid, and it builds the spherical shells. If we think it's a sphere, it always has a toroid in it, or it's always a part of a toroid.
Well, I don't think even while we look at a planet like the Earth, we might claim it's a sphere, but it's actually a toroidal structure. The void is.
Say one more thing real quick. The Kuiper belt is what we call the Hall cloud. So if anybody wants to know, I got that. People might get that confused, but the Kuiper belt is the Hall cloud. So,
okay. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we don't understand, and we don't know where the real origin of it is. For example, the rapid burst radio waves. They claim they come from a very long way away, but they could be local to the solar system. Like when I began my speculation, there was a question being asked, and I said it was described. There's a structure they were looking at, and I was seeing lightning pulses along it, and I went, "Oh, you guys do remember the days of televisions, which were picture tubes, don't you?"
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I said, what you're seeing probably is X-ray lightning structure that's been through a plasma cloud. And because it's been through a plasma cloud, the X-ray frequencies have been dropped down into visible light. And what you're seeing is one of those plasma ball structures in space between stars.
So are you saying ether?
And then there is in this thing, as I said, you guys have got access to the nuclear detection history of the Earth. You know, when they're looking for nuclear bombs, go back and look at your data, and look for evidence of lightning discharges from the heliopause to the sun, which would produce X-rays and gamma rays and radio bursts. And they went away and had a look, and sure enough, I got told afterwards, again with no proof of it, that there are electrical discharges that happen. They can run for up to 30 minutes with the electrical discharge voltage level of 10 to the 7T. That's 70, 10 to the 70 electron volts. Yeah, we talk about a lightning bolt of that sort of thing. If it hit the planet, there wouldn't be much to be happy about. Pretty much all life on the planet is snotted. It's orders of magnitude well beyond the thunderbolts that Ramon and the Plasma Universe guys and others talk about. It's just energy level scales are huge. And the reason why I got asked the question and all the rest of it was apparently a spacecraft was traveling somewhere in the solar system and got fried instantly. 1 minute was working, the next it was not working, and the electrical discharge detection systems were off scale. And this is early in the process of coming up with my speculations, because I knew that there's certain material that would spin in counter rotation arrangement. It was magnetic, and between these things there were 3 electrical discharge points occurring. And I said, well, if that's happening on a tabletop with magnetic material that wants to self-circulate, then it will happen out there in space inside our solar system. In other words, I expect to see 3 ecliptic plane discharges at 360, 120 degrees separation from the outside of the heliopause to the sun. And because they're electrically negative, and the planets are electrically negative, it's going to bypass all the planets and not necessarily interact with them unless the planet suddenly turns positive, and it's going to smack into the sun. And when you think about what's going on, we've got a charged stream of particles running away from the sun to the heliopause. The positive particles are slower moving than the negative ones. The electrons race out to the surface, spread around, And then the positive stuff arrives, changes the electrical conductivity of the thing, and there's a discharge back down through the solar wind to the surface of the sun. You know, you don't need an external discharge mechanism, but that sort of thing would occur. And to claim that it couldn't occur is just defying the laws of electromagnetic physics. It's just that, you know, you've got an environment that doesn't appear to be expressing that. But X-rays can occur in a conduit, and you would never see them. And if they occur, the atmosphere of the Earth and everything in it excludes them from being observed anyway. You've got to be above the atmosphere to see the X-rays and the gamma rays, because the atmosphere absorbs them, which is what the nuclear detection system was doing. So some of this stuff is actually local to the solar system. And when we understand that the solar wind is a charged stream of electrical particles, positive and negative, racing out to a boundary somewhere, creating a positive sun anode and a negative sphere of Oort cloud around us, there's going to be the occasional discharge, avalanche breakdown of some kind, where the balance of charge is going to try and neutralize. And when that happens, you're going to get massive discharges. You know, because the electrical capacitance of the shell is determined by the surface area of the shell. So when we're talking about the heliopause, what are we talking? Something around about 1.6 light years away from the center. The volume of something that's 1.6 light years in for a surface area is huge. So, you know, what's the electrical potential of anything inside that structure? You know, it depends on how close you are to either the sun or the boundary. But if you're only, you know, moderate distance away from either, it'll look like zero charge. There's fundamental misunderstandings. You know, we go to university or textbooks or high school and learn this stuff, and then, you know, conveniently forget it, and then get surprised when it comes and bites us on the bum when we observe this sort of stuff. But, you know, the thing that amazes me is, you know, people that are supposed to be really intelligent and really knowing their stuff, if they can't track this sort of stuff down easily, you've got to be questioning the veracity and usefulness of our education. You know, it's taken me 60 years to correct issues that I got in the first 20 years, and even then I'm still struggling. But yeah, so a lot of people just cannot understand it. Ramon and I are on the same wavelength when it comes to these electrical discharges or electromagnetic discharges, that I'd like to call them. The power scale is just beyond comprehension. You know, nuclear weapons are only 10 to the 21, I think. 100 seconds of solar output is sufficient to stop the Earth from spinning. 100 seconds. You can stop the Earth from spinning with that energy. Right? And if we stop the Earth from spinning, it'll be a major disaster. You know, life extinction level event. And we're talking about, you know, electrical discharge or electromagnetic discharge of charged particles to the sun from the heliopause, which is, you know, multiple times higher, more than a factor of 4 or 5. So instead of 10 to the 21 or 31 or whatever it is something like the 10 to the 150. You know, we got a whack of that sort of energy, and, you know, we might not have a planet. The electrical stress would probably turn the Earth into an asteroid belt, which wouldn't be a good day for anybody. And the current asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter is exactly what I think happened, something along those lines. A planet got shattered. Which doesn't make our nuclear weapons look that flash.
Yeah, but Rob, they're flash enough to destroy us.
Oh, they make your day bad, but they wouldn't necessarily make my day bad. Only because, you know, there's 3,000 kilometres between us. Anyway, If you want to continue, give me a minute because I need to go to answer a nature call. I'll be back shortly.
You'll have to edit this bit of quietness, buddy, or that could be contemplation time.
Yeah, I'm just working, filling out some orders.
Rightio, I'm back. So if someone were to ask me a question along the lines of, what do you think the dimensionality of our existence is? My response is, I think our environment is at least a 13-dimensional structure.
Okay.
Which we experience with a 5-dimensional sensor system, which is what gives us 3 dimensions plus time, motion stuff. And because we're a 13-dimensional structure, we're seeing our universe as 13, 11, 7, 5, 3-dimensional inputs. We're not able to discriminate and separate these things easily. It's almost like, some sort of limitation mechanism has been stuck on us, which would explain paranormal experiences like telepathy and precognition and remote viewing and things along those lines. And maybe we have, as a planetary life form structure, a sort of like a shared experience of memory. In other words, you get the experiences that are described by some indigenous tribes, where they just know that some bad thing has occurred, or someone's died or someone's born. My mother used to experience that sort of stuff. She'd be out watering the garden, feet covered with water and having fun, and then it's just suddenly come to her, the name of the new child that's just been born and things like this. You can't explain it in a time when you didn't have the mobile phone and instant telecommunications. Those things didn't happen. And I think at the moment, what we're seeing with the world response to events that are occurring is that there's a degree of shock going on. There's a shock factor amongst the community of people. They just can't believe that these events are kicked off, and they want to stop them, but they don't know how. And when they do try to stop them, you get the Trudeau response. You make a fake story to give more power to the political people that want to enslave everybody, when Trudeau is the one who should go to jail in Canada for treason against the Canadian nation. But he's not the only one. There's a campaign in Australia about showing women respect. It's government funded and communities behind it. Yet the Prime Minister is making claims that the female politicians of the opposition are going to be the most dangerous people in the world. It's, let's bash the women in Parliament because, we're trying to win an election. And it's no different to, walking in the front door and beating the crap out of the missus because you had a bad day at school. It's the same behaviour, and I want to know why our Prime Minister thinks that that's okay when he's out there telling everybody that it's not okay. He's a hypocrite. But we're seeing this sort of behaviour the world over, which is a shame.
Let's see, Ken Wheeler just answered. He said, I can't take a few days off. I have to work every day, so no thanks.
Does he want to produce a video that will be shown?
That's what I'll ask. Would you like to produce? Oh, I can't do the voice while I do that.
But anyway, at least he responded.
Yeah.
Not everybody can turn up. But, Ken has a very interesting take on things. But, as long as he recognises he doesn't know everything, that's okay. But I would wonder, with my speculation, how close it is to Ken's thinking.
He's pretty close to what we're talking about.
Does it express the same things, just in different terms?
Yeah, pretty much.
And if it does, Ken is Ken. He's struggled against, what he knows to be wrong. He's discovered it to be wrong, and everybody's got their foibles. There's people that don't like him for a variety of reasons. But, I think he's spot on with some of his COVID stuff.
Maybe I should say no travel necessary. I'll pay you to do a video. You know what I mean?
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't offer that.
You pay the presenters, especially the keynote speakers. If he wanted to be a presenter, I would be willing to pay him. Certain people are only going to do it based on payment. There's a name for that.
Well, I can't travel. They won't let me travel because I refuse to comply to compulsory compliance with a voluntary issue.
Rob, that's about your freedom.
Yeah, I'm going to accept the responsibility.
You've not been listening. We only did that to you for your freedom.
Well, I don't care. They take that
That's
argument.
what they're all saying.
Yeah, well, I said, when you deny people the right to earn an income just because you don't like the fact that they won't do what you're told, that's not good enough. You're not here to impose those regulations upon people. It's not part of the deal.
I agree totally.
But I said, where do you get off telling my kids that they are not allowed an earning income unless they do it your way? You're no better. You're no better than people that we've fought wars with in the past to kill, to get rid of that sort of thinking. And here you are imposing it upon everything. You're doing an injustice against your grandparents.
Yes, if you hear anything at the moment about what's going on in Europe, it's all about freedom. And it's a real...
Well, it's got nothing to do with freedom. The first consequent event...
people believe that we're free.
Yeah, well, they weren't. And they haven't realised that. Freedom is not something that's given.
Well, you obviously aren't. You obviously don't have freedom because it restricts your ability to make income to have a lifestyle within our system.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean I have to pay the system.
No.
If they turn up at the front door demanding, I'll say, fuck off, get your gun out and shoot me, or fuck off. I'm not really interested in the rubbish. Yeah.
But they get the majority to be.
Yeah, well, the majority are going to suffer what those minority are going to suffer because they've allowed it to occur. When God smacked around the Israelites, it wasn't just the ones that were fucking it up. It was everybody that did nothing to stop it. It's not government's responsibility to fix my problems or my community's problems. That responsibility lies with myself or my community and not with the government at any level. Government's only got one job. That's to make sure the arseholes over there are kept over there and they're not brought over here. That's their only job, is to protect the community from external threat. We shouldn't be going into sorting a squabble between people that need to understand what freedom is all about. And let's face it, the Ukraine hasn't been free for over 500 years, and Russia hasn't been free for probably the same length of period of time. It doesn't really matter whether it was the communists or the oligarchs or the czars. It's pretty much they're all somebody's slave. They're all serfs or the aristocrats. And, the idea of individual freedom is only something that's been around since the French and the French Civil War, or Revolution, the American Revolution, and the British Revolution that occurred in the 1650s, when Oliver Cromwell, beheaded the first King Charles. But he was a dictator just as bad as King Charles was. After the throne was restored, they exhumed Oliver Cromwell. They hung, draw, and quartered him. But he was a bit dead, it's a pointless exercise, but that's what they did. So they got their revenge. A lot of people don't realise that the English had their own civil war and the aristocracy took a hit. But unfortunately, it was just one aristocrat that suffered the beheading exercise. Unlike France, where anybody who they didn't like got beheaded. That's the thing, we as individuals in our world, we must learn our history. We need to understand what happened. And people, never really understood, the Americans in particular, never really understood the First and Second World War, why those things occurred. It was basically an argument over economic control of the planet. And the Americans still have that, don't get it attitude. But that's part of the way they think that the world stops at their borders. The planet Earth is America, and that's it. I forget who the comedian was. He used to be the Late Show host, the silver-haired, Italian-looking guy. Anyway, he was walking down the street with a map of the world with all the boundaries in it, with all the country boundaries, no names on it. So he set the cecil up with a whiteboard on it, with this map on it. He said to anybody who walked past, "Can you name any country on the world map?" And the thing that amazed me is none of the adults could even point to where the United States was. And then this 9-year-old kid or 12-year-old kid from primary school, comes up and he points to one box after another, one location after another, and he named 109 countries in a row. And I'm thinking, what happened between that age of that kid and the adult age of the people around him? What happened to their education? Something's seriously gone wrong there. And now we're starting to see the same thing in other countries. It's almost like, don't let them learn anything that's of value.
The geometric view is a love is watching product. Love is watching being. Thank you for doing that. Keep your eyeballs out. Pay attention. There's a lot going down this year. Be vigilant. Be mindful. Be insightful. Be loving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being kind. Share the love. Spread the love. Become the love. Amen.
grimiest and the grittiest of life I'm there. Oh no, to the grimiest and the grittiest of life I'm there. Life and death. All of us. We have hope. Live your life for the cause. Love, life, live it to the fullest.
Eyes all over the wall, eyes all over your body. Can I just see straight through it? Transparent golden scaling. The largest of the atom must embark on this because this is the journey. The journey is life. Take hold. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. I'm look me upon. Always love me like you. There's nothing to do.
Join us in the fight for Christ, in the fight to save lives. Surprise, submersible, so fast, the first, the last of baptism. Need to say more. Pay attention like the marrow in your bones, arrow in your back, arrow in your lungs, zero into the fact, tertiary Christian neuron, synapses and narrow entrance into eternity. I'm a courier of charismatic attitude, meters even meter, it might even be fun. Cider indeed, need nerds, you need nerds, need a virtue, need to be a reason. Feasibility to be a reason to be clean and sober, keys, open doors, signs of directions. Be the carrier of candlesticks, the man who brought you change. Every second you ride, to make your ribbon, you pivot, potential, you curve a cat. Could be cold, could be copycat, could be copy corpse, could be Schrodinger's best. Could be Micro Racker, Mackie Normo, open-minded, itsy bitsy, freaking huge. A universal supermassive aspect of attached awareness. Aware of this all?
Collaborative consumption.
Are you aware of this song?
Collaborative consumption. The new thing consumption. Collaborative consumption.
Get up now! Out of the boat! Drop! Where did this up? We don't got about a girl. But about a not about a goddess spirit. Get up, what's up? Get out, chap, cross. Red, and I'll put up.
I'm in search of, I'm in earth love, I'm in living life, I'm in living color, I'm in airdrop, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing, I'm an earth thing.